Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations meeting. We're delighted you're here, and without any further delay, I will ask the members to go to tab 1, the minutes of the January 22 meeting, and I take a moment to look at them, and you may have already had an opportunity to read them. I will entertain a motion to receive the minutes. Motion. There is a motion with a second. Yes, thank you. Take just a moment, and are there any questions or comments or suggested changes?
We detect a quorum.
Yeah. And then as we take that time to look over the minutes, for the record, I do detect a quorum for the meeting today. And since there are no questions or comments, and that we do have it on the floor for your consideration, I'll entertain a voice vote. Those in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It carries. Thank you. And next, I'll defer to Dr. Lippert for the commission and staff update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first thing we have under commission updates is we have some minor revisions to the bylaws that we would like. This does take the approval of the commission members. There's 2 sets of revisions. The first are basically just bringing the bylaws into correspondence with changes in the statute that have been made over the years, and these just haven't been updated. Things on the number of members and those types of things that are in statute, but they weren't reflected properly in the bylaws. And those are indicated in the copy of the bylaws, which is behind tab 2. And those are indicated, those are double underlined. And there's just a few of those, and those are located in Article 1, Section 2. Then there are some additional changes that the staff is recommending, and these are to recognize the fact that there's things called email now and online meetings and teleconferences and things like that. Our bylaws were written 30-some years ago, and they did not reflect those. So we would like to reflect those in the bylaws. Those are indicated single underline, and in a couple of different places in the bylaws. There's Article 3, Sections 9, 12, and 16, a new section, Article 3, Section 18, and an Article 6, Section 2. I'm happy to go through any of those if there's any questions on any of those changes, but they're all minor, and they're basically recognizing the way we're already doing business now. And so if there are no questions, Mr. Chair, I would request approval of those changes.
Members, are there questions for Dr. Lippert on this? I do have one question myself, if I may. And I just want to end for the record with regards to electronic meetings, and I'm looking particularly at Section 18, that I want to make sure that any of those meetings that we may have are accessible to the press.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully we won't be doing any additional online meetings. This was something that we were authorized to do with the change in state law as a result of the pandemic. We just wanted to capture that in case there's a situation in the future where we have to do that again. We have had streaming meetings a couple times in the past for subcommittees, but it's unusual. But absolutely, those are always streaming and available for the press, either in person or streaming. Yeah.
Well, and that is what I understood, Dr. Lippert, but I just, for the record, wanted to make sure that everyone knew that these changes did not in any way change the press's availability to our meetings. And I believe we will need to take a voice vote on the bylaw changes. Chairman, you're recognized.
When I'm looking at Section 18, it just talks about the meetings of the commission may be held entirely. It doesn't indicate that there's any special circumstance that would require that. It just seems like you could do that at will, ad hoc. Is that the intent?
Dr. Lippert.
That actually isn't the intent, though. As I said, Madam Chair, we have done in the past subcommittee meetings, but I'm happy to amend that language to say if required.
Yeah, I think that's fairly broad.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
You could end up having every TACIR meeting.
No, and definitely not our intent.
So.
Yeah.
All right. Representative, you're recognized.
Thank you, Senator Yeager. Just a quick question on page 2 of the bylaws revision. just wondered, in section 7, or line item 7, 10, and 11, were these issues that, of course, I'm still relatively new to TACIR, but are these issues that normally we didn't study and we're adding those, or as it relates to those subject matters?
Yeah, that's a good question. Representative, though, these were issues that were not included in our original directions on what to study, that were added in statute several years ago that just had not been changed in the bylaws to reflect that change in statute.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Those are good questions. Other questions? And I have a follow-up to Chairman Hazelwood's question. You indicated that the words, I believe, if required, would be no problem with an amendment to the appropriate. Well, how should we handle that from a, should we amend that, or would it just be with the understanding that will be changed that way?
I believe we could do it that way.
All right. Is there any objection from the chairman? It will, in the record, it'll show that we will add that phrase to that provision that you were.
Or we could do it as an amendment.
I would prefer an amendment because, again, I'm sorry, I'm out of the habit. I would prefer an amendment because, again, if required is pretty broad as well. I think you might want to give some thought and maybe bring this piece of it back next time.
Okay. I'm happy to take it as amendment today, whatever your pleasure is, Chairman.
I would prefer to see something more specific in writing
All right.
on this particular
All right.
change.
Madam Chair, would you be agreeable to us approving the other changes, and then we can even prepare some language and send that to you and see if it's adequate?
Certainly.
All right. The question's been raised. Could we vote on this in tomorrow's section?
Certainly.
Well, and we'll just follow your lead. We'll go ahead and approve it, and then we'll have the language to approve in tomorrow's session. Get it done. Unless there's objection to that procedure.
No.
Are there other questions? Are there others? Well, there being none, the chair to entertain a motion to approve the bylaws. A motion to approve with a second. Now, and any further questions or comments? We're going to vote on the bylaws with the understanding that we will be bringing an amendment tomorrow to reflect Chairman Hazelwood's suggestion.
Mr. Chair, just for the assistance of our recorders in the back, who was the second by?
The Vice Mayor,
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Either one.
Are there any other questions then? All right, we will take a voice vote on the bylaw changes, again, with the understanding that we will be bringing an amendment tomorrow to reflect Chairman Hazelwood's suggestion. Those in favor of the bylaws as submitted, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. There being none, it passes unanimously. Thank you, Dr. Lippert, and I will call your attention now.
Still, some additional.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was trying to cut you off there. Pray continue.
The less I talk, the better usually, Mr. Chair, but we have a couple other things under both the commission updates and the staff updates. And the first, the next item under commission updates is we have a few departing members that we're recognizing today. And those include Mayor Keith McDonald, who's here with us today, and Deputy Commissioner Paula Davis. Mayor McDonald chose not to seek re-election of Mayor Bartlett, and unfortunately we can't keep him on the commission if he's not mayor. He served two separate terms on the commission. First one from July 2008 to July 2012, and then he was reappointed in July of 2017 through February of this year. And then Deputy Commissioner Davis was one of our longest serving members and served on the commission from July 2003 until February of this year. We have Senate resolutions commemorating their service to TACIR, and those are located in the docket book also behind tab 2. But we're also going to present the one to Mayor McDonald since he's here with us today. And then, of course, like I said, the language for the one for Commissioner Davis is also in the document, and I invite you to read that. Research Director, David Lewis, is going to read the resolution, and we're going to present the resolution to Mayor McDonald.
Should we have him come up?
Yes, please.
Mayor, if you would just come up here and approach the podium while we read it, and then we'll go down there.
Yeah, after. Okay.
I didn't hear that. Didn't need to hear it. Is that Mayor McDonald's?
A resolution to honor Mayor A. Keith McDonald of Bartlett for his meritorious service on the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. Whereas it is fitting that the members of this General Assembly should honor those members of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, TACIR, who have performed their duties with the utmost integrity and whose efforts have ensured proper attention to myriad issues in fulfillment of the Commission's mission to serve as a forum for the discussion and resolution of intergovernmental problems, to provide high-quality research support to state and local government officials in order to improve the overall quality of government in Tennessee, and to improve the effectiveness of the intergovernmental system to better serve the citizens of Tennessee. And whereas A. Keith McDonald, as owner and founder of McDonald Insurance and Financial Services, has received numerous leadership awards within the insurance industry and had the honor of serving as a delegate to the White House Conference on Small Business in 1986 during President Ronald Reagan's administration. And whereas, while distinguishing himself in service to his community and demonstrating his own leadership abilities, Mr. McDonald co-founded Leadership Bartlett in 1990. And whereas Mr. McDonald began his public service career in October 1997, when he was elected to the first of 2 terms on the City of Bartlett's Board of Aldermen, subsequently elected mayor of Bartlett, he was sworn into office on January 1st, 2003, and continues to serve ably in that capacity. And whereas Mayor McDonald has served on numerous boards and commissions, including as the 2007 and 2008 chair of the National League of Cities First Tier Suburbs Council, and as a member of its Public Safety and Crime Prevention Steering Committee, he has received numerous awards, including the Bobby Donovan Public Service Award and the Memphis Most Award of Most Beloved Leader. And whereas during his tenure as mayor of Bartlett, Bartlett has been chosen as one of the top 100 places to live by CNN Money Magazine, and the Veterans Memorial Park has been completed. And whereas Mayor McDonald was named the Tennessee Municipal League's 2012 Mayor of the Year because he typifies the attributes of intelligence, effectiveness, hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. And whereas Mayor McDonald has endeared himself to his community through his compassion for the citizens of Bartlett and his genuine concern for his staff through acts of kindness and concern throughout his career. And whereas Mayor A. Keith McDonald was appointed to TACIR by Lieutenant Governor and Speaker of the Senate Ron Ramsey in 2008, and having served with distinction as a member of the Commission for 4 years, he has now completed his term. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Senate of the 112th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, the House of Representatives concurring, that we honor and commend Mayor A. Keith McDonald for his countless contributions to the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations and for his honorable and dedicated service to the good people of the state of Tennessee, and wish him the best in all future endeavors.
And Mayor, we have for you an engrossed copy of this, of the resolution that was just read, and I hope that you will accept this with our gratitude for your service to TACIR, through TACIR to the state of Tennessee. On a personal note, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with you. We'll miss the input that you've given to the commission. So take this with our best wishes and our gratitude for a job well done on this committee.
Thank you. No, thank you. Antonio, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. While they're being seated, let me just tell you that I've served with, that I've enjoyed being in the minutia from time to time on legislation that has been sent to this committee. And to the staff, what a brain trust. And I am so proud of you all, and I've expressed that a number of times. And I will miss you, our young geniuses, being able to work with you and to even understand what you wrote sometimes. So it's been great. Thank you. Thank you all. God bless you.
Dr. Lippert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a happier note, we're welcoming some new members today as well. We're pleased to welcome 3 new members to the commission, all whom were appointed in February of this year. They include Senator Heidi Campbell, Deputy Commissioner Denise Thomas of the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and Councilman Chase Carlisle of the City of Memphis. So please join me in welcoming our new members. And then we have some staff updates, Mr. Chair. First, we have Senior Research Director Leah Eldridge graduated this month, actually just last week, from the Tennessee Government Executive Institute. TGEI is the 2-week residential executive institute that provides senior level managers in Tennessee state government the opportunity for academic study in learning in executive responsibility and cross-agency network. It's designed to enhance the individual skills of senior leaders. Leah, if you could please stand. And join me in thanking Leah.
Yes.
And one additional thing, Leah probably already suspects she will be the one preparing the language for the amendment to the bylaws. So congratulations, Leah. Then we have 2 staff members recently. That one fell flat. I don't know. We have two staff members recently reached service longevity milestones, and a third has completed a training goal. Web Development and Publications Manager Teresa Gibson achieved 30 years of state service in February. Research Manager Michael Mount hit 10 years in March. And in January, Research Manager Jennifer Berry became the 2nd staff member so far to complete the rigorous TACIR learning pyramids. If you could join me in congratulating Teresa, Michael, and Jennifer on their accomplishments. Oh, there she is. All right, and we will be saying goodbye to a staff member as well. In August, Senior Research Associate Kevin Van Zandt is leaving us to return to teaching. We're going to terribly miss Kevin, but not too much because he's agreed to stay on in a part-time capacity to help as an editor, proofreader. So if you could join me in wishing Kevin the best of luck in his new endeavor. Kevin, Dr. Van Zandt. And finally, we are fortunate to have 2 interns from the University of Tennessee working with us this summer. We have Lucas Gonzalez is in the Master of Public Policy and Administration program with an expected graduation date of next January. Lucas is actually working with us remotely, so he's not here with us today, but he promised me he'd be watching, so welcome aboard, Lucas. And then we have Jack Duncan, who's a rising junior majoring in economics and philosophy with an emphasis on politics and the law. Please join me in welcoming Lucas and Jack. Jack, please stand.
Where's Jack?
There he is. And Mr. Chair, that completes the commission and staff updates.
Thank you very much. There are no questions for Dr. Lippert. There being none, then we will turn now to the fiscal year 22 accomplishments, and we are going to defer to Lisa Eldridge, who will be stepping in for Melissa Brown. If you will make that report, Ms. Eldridge, we will appreciate it.
Is your mic on?
Can you speak into the mic? It's hard to hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. You turn it.
I think you turned it off.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So the commission published 4 official commission reports this year. It published Exploring the Feasibility of a Gold Depository in Tennessee and expanding opportunities for state contracting through enhanced data collection and reporting. Both of these studies were referred to the Commission by the General Assembly. TACIR also published the Building Tennessee's Tomorrow, Anticipating the State's Infrastructure Needs, and TVA Payments in Lieu of Taxes annual report to the General Assembly. The Commission published one staff report, The Effect of the COVID-19 Recession on Public Infrastructure Needs Interim Report, Lessons Learned from the Great Recession and Early Observations from Local Government Officials. The Commission staff gave 2 presentations outside the office during the fiscal year. They presented Payment in Lieu of Taxes Programs to Incentivize Economic Development to the Tennessee School Board Association, and presented Building Tennessee's Tomorrow, Anticipating the State's Infrastructure Needs, July 2020 through June 2025, to the Senate Finance Ways and Means Committee. Staff also responded to requests for information and assistance not only from members of the General Assembly, but also from local government officials, state agencies, lobbyists, the public, and the media as well. During fiscal year 2022, the Commission administered contracts with the 9 development districts who support the Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory, and also administered a contract with MTSU for the Tracking Tennessee's Economy website. In addition, the Commission continued to monitor and report on the TVA Payments in Lieu of Taxes and the effect of the Electric Generation and Transmission Cooperative Act of 2009. It completed the fiscal year 2022-2023 fiscal capacity model, monitored implementation of PC 1101, continued the annual Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory, and monitored intergovernmental tax, fiscal, and education legislation. Throughout this year, the Commission disseminated all reports electronically and maintained detailed information about continuing research on TACIR's webpage, improved and refined data visualization and interactive analysis tools for infrastructure reporting, continued to improve the Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory application to work with the latest versions of Microsoft, streamlined the process of processing data, and automated the process of formatting and printing infrastructure one-page summaries for the annual report. It continued to improve and refine data visualization and interactive analysis tools for fiscal capacity data and information, updated and enhanced the profiles of Tennessee's counties, providing easy public access to detailed demographic, financial, and other information for each, and added dashboards to the county profile page. It also published timely information on economic indicators on the Tracking Tennessee's Economy webpage in partnership with MTSU, and continued a collaboration with the Tennessee Customer-Focused Government to share and link to TACIR data, resources, and publications on the Transparent Tennessee website. And finally, this year, the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development released a map of broadband availability for public comment, which was a recommendation from the Commission report, Broadband Internet Deployment, Availability, and Adoption in Tennessee, 4 years after the Broadband Accessibility Act. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mike Strickland, who will provide us a legislative update. Mr. Strickland is a research associate.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Strickland, and today I will be presenting the Commission's legislative update for 2022, the memo for which is behind tab 4 of your docket books. This update has 2 parts. In the first part, I will be covering bills that the General Assembly considered or passed earlier this year that relate in some way to the work that TACIR has done. And the second part concerns bills that request new studies from the Commission. For the first part, on the subject of broadband internet and small cell wireless, this is a topic that the Commission has addressed several times in recent years, beginning with a 2017 report on broadband deployment, followed by 2 more reports, one in 2020 and one in 2021. Addressing an issue that was studied as part of the Commission's 2017 report, the General Assembly this year passed Public Chapter 1102, which exempts the purchase and lease of broadband equipment from the sales and use tax for 3 years. The General Assembly also enacted Public Chapter 799, which prohibits local entities from discriminating against the installation of small wireless facilities in public rights-of-way. There were several other broadband-related bills that did not pass, one of which would have granted oversight of broadband and related services to the Tennessee Public Utility Commission, and another that would have allowed electric plants and cooperatives to provide broadband service in distressed counties that were outside of their usual service areas. On the subject of court fees and criminal law, in 2020, the Commission produced a report on GPS monitoring of defendants accused of domestic violence, and it advised on ways to improve GPS monitoring programs. The General Assembly considered but did not pass Senate Bill 950 by Kyle and House Bill 1323 by Hardaway, which would have required that in cases of stalking or involving victims of domestic abuse, law enforcement would provide victims with information about GPS monitoring that courts could impose on defendants. However, the General Assembly did pass Public Chapter 1084, which creates a fund to supply GPS monitoring devices to indigent DUI defendants, as well as Public Chapter 1097, which requires the Treasurer to report on any surplus in the state's Electronic Monitoring Agency Fund by February 1st of each year. On the subject of education, this is an area that TACIR has been involved with for many years, primarily through the Basic Education Program, or BEP. Each year, TACIR produces a model for county-level fiscal capacity for education, which is then averaged with another model provided by the University of Tennessee. This year, the General Assembly enacted the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or TISA, which replaces the BEP for determining how education funding needs are to be assessed. TACIR has two statutory roles related to TISA. First, the Act assigns the Director of TACIR to serve on the TISA Review Board. And second, just as it has done in the past for the BEP, TACIR will continue to provide fiscal capacity estimates of local governments under TISA. On the subject of elections, the General Assembly considered a variety of bills this year related to election security, a topic the Commission has looked at previously in two reports in 2007 and 2018. Both of those reports recommended that the state adopt voting machines that allow for voter-verifiable paper audit trails. This year, the General Assembly did enact Public Chapter 1144, which requires that every voting machine used by a county election commission produce a voter-verifiable paper record by default. The law requires voting machines meet the standard by January 1st, 2024. The General Assembly considered but did not pass two similar bills, as well as a third which would require the Secretary of State to conduct forensic audits of at least 5 counties after every statewide election. And Senate Bill 2617 by Nicely and House Bill 2827 by Parkinson would have conditioned the use of voting machines on the approval of the local governing body. On the subject of land use and rights-of-way, just this year, the Commission produced a draft report on dedications of rights-of-way, the final version of which you will be hearing about shortly from our colleague Michael Mount. This report contributed to Public Chapter 1128, which draws on the recommendation of the Commission to codify in statute the so-called Nolan-Dolan standards that have been established by the U.S. Supreme Court. Under these standards, local government planning commissions may only require right-of-way dedications where there is an essential nexus with a legitimate government interest, and the amount of land dedicated is roughly proportional to that interest. On the subject of littering, the General Assembly this year passed several bills related to both littering and illegal tire dumping. This is a subject that the Commission has addressed before in 2020, and of course there is another study on litter in the state that is currently ongoing. Prior law required a pre-disposal fee to be paid on each new tire sold in Tennessee, with the fee to cover recycling of waste tires for some type of beneficial end use. Public Chapter 746 amends the law so that the disposal fee can also be spent on direct disposal rather than only recycling. Public Chapter 1105 extends the offense of aggravated criminal littering to include the illegal disposal of waste tires, making this either a misdemeanor or felony, depending on the number of tires involved. Public Chapter 899 raises the fine for mitigated criminal littering from $50 to $500, while Public Chapter 941 adds aggravated criminal littering to a list of offenses for which neighborhood or homeowner associations can seek injunctions or restraining orders. And Public Chapter 903 authorizes funds from the existing beer and soda bottle tax to be applied towards litter cleanup and prevention programs along roadways, waterways, and shorelines. On the subject of local government conflicts of interest, the General Assembly enacted Public Chapter 656, which requires that members of local governments must declare any conflicts of interest before voting on budget proposals or appropriations, fitting with a 2016 Commission report on managing conflicts of interest for county employees. On the subject of precious metal sales, late last year, the Commission finalized a report on the possibility of forming a state-backed gold depository in Tennessee. The Commission recommended against a depository, but did suggest the option of exempting some precious metals from sales and use tax. The General Assembly had previously considered 2 bills that would have created such an exemption, but did not pass them. Following the publication of the Commission report, however, the General Assembly did pass Public Chapter 1092, which exempts coins, currency, and bullion made of precious metals from sales and use taxes. Then, on the subject of professional privilege taxes, in a 2016 report, the Commission assessed the effects of the professional privilege tax and its possible elimination. The report noted that there were certain inequities with the tax, but made no definite recommendation for alterations to it. The General Assembly discussed but did not pass several bills that would have limited or phased out the professional privilege tax entirely over the span of the next several years. Other bills would have kept the tax in place but modified it. One bill, for instance, would have exempted retired professionals from the tax. The General Assembly did, however, pass Public Chapter 1083, which eliminated the professional privilege tax for physicians. On the subject of state contracting, in January of this year, the Commission reported on conditions in state contracting for minority-owned businesses and to provide greater transparency in state contracting and help ensure that spending goals with diverse businesses are being met. The report recommended that the Governor's Office of Diversity Business Enterprise include, as part of its annual report, agency-level data on spending goals and achievements with minority-owned businesses. The General Assembly shortly after enacted this into law with Public Chapter 793. So we can turn now to the legislation on new studies that came under discussion this year. The General Assembly passed bills ordering 2 new studies, but there are 4 other bills that did not pass both chambers and come to the Commission as requests. So together this makes a total of 6 potential new studies. When we turn to tab 5 in a few moments, there will be further information on each of these, and the Commission will then have the opportunity to vote on them. The first study concerns passenger rail service, and this is actually based on not 1 but 2 separate bills, Public Chapter 1114, along with Public Chapter 1124. Both direct TACIR to carry out a study of the potential for passenger rail service in Tennessee. The first of these directs TACIR to study rail service that might connect major cities across the grand divisions of the state, while the second adds that TACIR is to include a survey of state-sponsored Amtrak rail projects initiated in the past 10 years in other states. The first of these laws requires TACIR to share a report of its findings no later than July 1st, 2023. The second study concerns solar energy development. The General Assembly enacted Public Chapter 1043, which directs TACIR to study the effects of utility-scale solar energy development. And this study comes with a detailed list of questions, and there will be more information on the research plan for this under tab 5. The law requires TACIR to report its findings and recommendations no later than September 30th, 2023. As to the 4 bills that are coming to the Commission as requests, the first of these concerns healthcare reference-based pricing, and this is based on Senate Bill 2330 by Hensley and House Bill 2456 by Sparks, which asks TACIR to study the overall effects on health insurance of reference-based pricing, in which costs for medical procedures would be indexed to the cost paid by Medicare plus some margin. The bill passed in the Senate but was sent for summer study by the House Finance, Ways and Means Subcommittee, and the Senate bill requests that the study be completed by January 31st, 2023. The next study relates to emergency communications on college campuses. Senate Bill 2827 by Hensley and House Bill 2729 by Ogles passed in the Senate but was referred for summer study in the House. The bill requests TACIR study both the routing and storage of emergency communications on colleges and universities in Tennessee, specifically with regards to how universities store complaints of criminal activity, as well as best policies for how such emergency communication systems and the storage of their data might be improved. Next is a study that relates to so-called liquor by the drink taxes. This comes from Senate Bill 2262 by Briggs and House Bill 2419 by Manis, which was taken off notice in the House but passed in the Senate, and requests TACIR study the laws in Tennessee and other states regarding liquor by the drink and related taxes for the on-premise consumption of alcohol in restaurants. This study would be looking at liquor licensing and permitting for the restaurant industry, staffing challenges related to permits, wages, and training in such establishments, and barriers to entry for the industry. The bill requests that the study be completed by January 1st, 2024. And finally, on criminal fines and ambulance service funding, Senate Bill 1964 by Jackson and House Bill 1892 by Haston would have established a $150 fine for DUI offenses in Perry County specifically, with the resulting funds being allotted to the county's ambulance service. The bill did not pass the Senate or the House, but when it came up for discussion in the House Criminal Justice Subcommittee, it led to a request for a comprehensive study from TACIR on whether and how criminal fines of this type might support local government's needs for ambulance services. So those are the 6 studies that the General Assembly has put forward, and that concludes the legislative update. We do still have tab 5 after this, which covers more information on these studies, but if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to take them.
Do any of the members have questions for Mr. Strickland? There being none, thank you very much, Mr. Strickland. Thank you. I will now take us to tab 5, members, for our work program amendment and new research plans. Dr. Cliff Lippard will be substituting for Melissa to make the report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is, again, broken into 2 parts. First, I'm just going to briefly go over the status of existing studies, some of which we'll be covering as we go through the rest of the meeting today. And then we'll be going over the amendments to amend the work program to add requested studies. So first, on the status of existing work program projects, the first several of these are annual requirements. Our annual public infrastructure needs inventory. You approved the most recent report at our January 2021 meeting. We're continuing to work simultaneously on the next, on gathering data for, on completing the study for the next report and gathering data for the report after that. It's an ongoing cycle with the infrastructure report. The next is the TVA pilot annual report, which you approved at our January meeting, and we will be receiving the next annual report at our January 2023 meeting in order to meet the requirement for us to file that report by February 28th. Next is the Fiscal Capacity Index, and as both Leah and Mike mentioned, this is something we've been preparing several years as part of the BEP, and we will continue to be calculating the Fiscal Capacity Index under the state's new education funding formula, the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, or TISA. You will be receiving an update on that report tomorrow by Research Associate Presley Powers. The next report is not due to the department until May 1st of next year. Then we turn to some of the acts that we're currently studying. Public Chapter 497 Acts of 2021 was the act that directed us to study the effects of non-fish and game-related activities such as paddleboarding, canoeing, kayaking, and tubing. We're going to present a draft report for your review and comment on this study at our summer meeting, which is normally in September. We'll be setting that date either tomorrow or by survey with the members. And the final report will be at our fall meeting, which is generally in early December. On Public Chapter 503, Acts of 2021, that's a study directing us to study childhood obesity and its effects in Tennessee and short and long-term effects. We'll have the draft report for your review and comment also at the summer meeting, and a final report at the fall meeting. The next study is our study of dedications of public rights-of-way. We presented the draft report, as Mike said, at our January meeting, and we'll be asking you to approve the final report. That's actually the next tab after after this update. Then we have our study of electric vehicles. This is something that was requested by our members at our January 7th, 2021 meeting, and we are continuing to prepare that information. We'll have a draft report for your review and comment at the summer meeting, and the final report at our fall meeting. You're seeing a pattern here. There's going to be a lot of reports for review and comment at our summer meeting. The post-award grants, this is a study requested by the chairman, and it is a review of post-award and implementation process for state grants to local governments, including whether any changes are warranted. To streamline those processes, we'll have the draft report for your review and comment at our summer meeting and a final report at our fall meeting, but you will also we'll have a panel on that topic at today's meeting as well. Next on litter, this is a study requested by our vice chairman, and it this study determined that we would not focus on policies that impose deposits on bottles or bans on plastic bags, but to otherwise conduct a comprehensive review of litter and litter policy in the state. An update of the research will be presented tomorrow, and then a draft report will be presented at our fall meeting, and then a final report at the winter meeting, which is our January meeting. And then finally, the personal property tax study requested by Senator Lundberg, and that report we were going to have a panel on tomorrow, and then we will have review and comment on it at our summer meeting this year, and the final report at our fall meeting. So that's an update on our studies in progress, and that brings me to the 5 amendments that are submitted for your consideration to add studies to our work program. These 5 amendments actually cover 6 bills. And the first one, we've grouped together those public chapters. So these are requests for studies that have passed both chambers, and it's been our practice to group those into one amendment. Since both chambers of the legislature have demonstrated an interest in those studies. And the first is a study that, as Mike mentioned, of transportation directed by both Public Chapter 1114 and Public Chapter 1124. And the second is a study of Public Chapter 1043, which is the study of utility scale solar energy. So that's the first amendment. Mr. Chair, we can either take these one amendment at a time, or if you'd prefer, we could wait and take them in sequence after I'm done with the description.
Why don't we take them in sequence after the description?
Very good, thank you. The second amendment would, the rest of these are requests for studies that either passed one chamber but not the other, but were referred by both chambers, or in the last instance was just referred by one subcommittee, but not the other chamber. So the first of these is Senate Bill 2330 by Hensley, House Bill 2456 by Sparks. Mike described this one. This is the one related to health insurance prices and reference-based pricing. This bill passed the Senate, but was referred to summer study by the House Finance, Ways, and Subcommittee. It would have a due date of January 31st, 2023. The third amendment adds a study requested by Senate Bill 2827 by Hensley and House Bill 2729 by Ogles, and this is the one on the routing and storage of emergency communications on colleges and university campuses in the state. This one also passed the Senate, but was referred to summer study by the House Finance, Ways and Means Subcommittee. And then the fourth amendment is referred by Senate Bill 2262 by Briggs and House Bill 2419 by Manis, and this is the one on the liquor by the drink. And it also passed the Senate, but was taken off notice in the House. And then finally, the Fifth Amendment would add a study requested by House Bill 1892 by Haston related to earmarking driving under the influence of fines collected in Perry County for use by the county-operated ambulance service. This was referred by the House Criminal Justice Subcommittee. Its companion bill, Senate Bill 1964 by Jackson, was not calendared. Mr. Chair, those are the amendments, and I'm happy to request a vote on each of those in sequence.
All right, we will take them in sequence on a voice vote on each one, and I will take a few moments to entertain any questions or comments. And we will begin with Amendment 1, a study combining two separate pieces of legislation relative to passenger rail service in Tennessee. What?
That also has a solar study in that amendment as well.
Yes, that's correct. All right, do I have,
Mr. Chairman?
do I hear?
Could I
Yes,
ask a question?
yes.
I was just curious as why the House Ways and Means, what the reasoning was to refer to a summer study committee instead of TACIR. Does
I
anyone
cannot
know?
answer that question. Do we have anyone from the House that could answer it?
Just curious.
Yes, Representative Parkinson, or Chairman Hazelwood?
I believe we had a limited number of TACIR studies that we can request, and we prioritized those. That one did not make our priority list, and so summer study was the fallback.
All right. Mayor Brooks?
I have a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chair Lady, for that explanation. On Amendments 4 and 5, I know we're taking these in order, but just for the thought, if these two were either taken off notice in the House or never even calendared in the Senate, to me, that does not rise to the level of a direction by the General Assembly to send it to TACIR, nor does it indicate that there was interest in one or the other chambers for this to move forward. And with the very large amount of work we've already asked our team to accomplish, I would just like that to be noted as a question.
All right, Dr. Lampert.
So on the final amendment, I would agree, Vice Chairman, since there was no indication of movement in the Senate on that one. On the Fourth Amendment, since it did pass the Senate, and I believe Representative Williams also, there was some discussion of that in the House Finance Subcommittee on the potential for requesting a study of that one. I would refer that to him now.
Thank you. As it related to the one that's related to the House, I know that I spoke with the sponsor of the bill because of what the chair lady had spoke about earlier, where we, as former member of finance, you know that there are certain number of bills that we could do that. But I spoke with the House sponsor and said that we could advocate to have a study if there was appropriate time for TACIR to be able to do it. But as it relates to being directed by the House, it wouldn't have been appropriate to do more than the limit that we set. And so I would say in the instance of that one, as it relates to the House, that if TACIR found that they had the time to study it, then they'd be more than welcome to do that. I don't think they'd be outside the bounds of what the House said, but the House is not directing them to do it.
Mayor Frank.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering if we embarked on this study, would it allow leeway to look at existing infrastructure, rail infrastructure? There's a lot in the state of Tennessee that's been used for commercial purposes, but yet has kind of gone away with coal and other things. Would this allow some leeway to look at a tourism component or scenic railway or any of those other potentials for economic development with the use of that infrastructure?
I believe the question, it references Amendment 1. Dr. Lippert, could you respond to that?
So yeah, that's a great question, Mayor. And actually, the guidance that we're given in legislation on both of those actually would require that we look at freight rail lines because of the capacity issue. So we want to make sure that anything that we're recommending isn't disrupting the essential the flow of freight rail in the state of Tennessee. So that involves a comprehensive look at all that. So I would assume that would be part of what we look at as well.
Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as the bill sponsor for that legislation, that was the intent also to look at how it would affect tourism and and economic impact of it all. So, and I want to thank TACIR and Tasha too. I think Tasha's out there, that we're really taking a complete and holistic approach at how you know, the feasibility that it would take to do it. So, thanks.
And we will stay with that amendment until we'll take a voice vote on that. But when the debate is concluded, are there other questions or comments on Amendment 1? What we will do is we'll take a voice vote on this to approve the amendment. Would that be the proper language that you want? All right, there's a motion and a second motion and a second to take up Amendment 1. Any further discussion? Those in favor of the motion to take up the amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Carries. Thank you. Now we will go to Amendment 2, a study directed by the regarding let me see here, health insurance prices, the effects of health insurance prices when reference-based pricing is used. It did pass the Senate, but was referred to summer study by the House Finance. I would like, before I bring this up for a vote, I would like to ask Dr. Lippard if we have precedent this. I think Vice Chairman Brooks' comments are well taken. If, you know, one house isn't going to make the request, can we do it on the basis of the other house? Dr. Lippard, what's the precedent here for us to guide us?
So it's of course, entirely at the discretion of the commission if it's not referred by both houses. Generally speaking, if there is an indication that there's interest in both chambers, the commission has approved adding it to the work program as capacity allows, as we have the ability to conduct the study. In this case, it was referred to summer study and not referred to us specifically, but there had been some discussion of the possibility of us completing the study as well. I would say that, you know, we have proceeded with the intent of, with the expectation that we would likely be conducting the studies, this study as well in Amendment 2. We have the ability to conduct the study, and there is a precedence for the commission approving studies, even when they've only been referred by one chamber at some times in the past.
So that, for the record, there is precedence for this. If only one chamber makes the recommendation. In this instance, I think some of the comments earlier from the members was that the House's referral to summer study was not really an act of opposition, but it was the fact that they had reached their limit on request. So not necessarily an act of opposition.
It was simply a matter of priorities, and this
That's
did
right.
not rise to the level of a House priority.
All right, then we'll take this to a vote then. But if we have exhausted the discussion or questions on it, on Amendment 2, we vote to take Amendment 2. Those in favor of taking up the amendment, say aye. Those opposed, nay. Carries. One passed. All right, Amendment 3, to recommend, request a study of the routing and storage of emergency communications on colleges and universities in the state. Passed by the Senate, but referred to summer study by the House Finance, Ways and Means. Are there questions on this? Do we have a motion to approve Amendment 3?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So since there's no due date specified, how does that relate to priority related to the approval of those studies?
I didn't hear the last part, and that's my fault. I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating?
No, not at all. Since there's no due date specified, how does that relate as far as priority? Since that has come up around priority,
All right.
since there's no due date?
I'll refer to Dr. Lippard for that.
So we actually prefer when studies don't have a due date because it gives us flexibility to work them into the work program, which is a good thing in that we have the potential to focus on those that the legislature has shown is a priority, and we can kind of push it behind those and work it in between in other studies. There is a caveat to that, though. Anytime we push a study down the road, that means that's another study we're doing next year when we're setting priorities and requesting other studies. So if a study that's not referred by both chambers, we'd prefer it not to have a due date or a due date far over the horizon, but there is a downside to that as well.
Did that answer your question, ma'am? Thank you. Are there other questions on Amendment 3? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new, so forgive me if I'm asking a question everyone knows. What is the process through which you decide if something hasn't been recommended by both chambers? How do you decide what to prioritize?
Yes, Dr. Lip, I'm sorry.
That's essentially what we're working through right now, senators. And so it's based on, if something is passed as a public chapter, then there's no instance where the commission has not conducted those studies. I mean, if we're directed by law to study. In the past, I'm not aware of any time where a study has been requested by both chambers that the commission has not done it, even if it hasn't passed. As a matter of fact, one of our former chairs, Senator Norris, preferred studies to come to us by referral rather than public chapter because he didn't like the way it kind of messed up the Tennessee Code annotated, and you had to go back and clean that up later and take that study out. But so as long as it's referred by both chambers, clearly referred by both chambers, then the precedent has been the commission has always done study. And where a study has been requested by at least a committee of one chamber, then the commission nearly always has approved those studies and added them to the work program. Where it gets murkier is when it's only requested by a subcommittee or there's or clear opposition to it in one chamber, even though it may be referred by another. But about the only time we haven't adopted a study is when it's only been referred by a subcommittee or requested by a member, and there wasn't indications of support in the other chamber.
Continue, Senator. You still have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm perplexed a little bit because I remember throughout session hearing that TACIR was swamped. And so I had thought there were lots and lots of studies coming, and I guess I'm surprised to see that this is the process.
So, this is why, Senator, the House has gone to the process of prioritizing and sending everything through a special TACIR calendar to try to ensure they're not sending us more studies that we can handle one time. What you have to keep in mind is any studies if we conduct all these studies, we've already got a docket of other studies that we're continuing to work on, and some of those studies are multi-year studies that won't be done until next year. So especially anything that has a short suspense date, we have to work around those existing studies. And then we also have our 3 recurring projects that we continue to work on: the Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory, Fiscal Capacity, and the TVA. Those last 2 being smaller, but they still do take up staff time. So it's not just these studies that we're talking about. We're talking about these studies in addition to other things we're already working on.
Thank you, Senator. Do we have other questions? Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager. I just thought it'd be important to follow on from what the senator was asking. In the House, we have obviously 2/3 more members than the Senate does, and we have several folks that have fantastic ideas, and some of which rise to the level of needing study. And so there has been in the past instances where instead of sending something to summer study because it wasn't fully developed, the idea was you could send it to TACIR and they'd do your homework for you. And so the remedy for us was to limit the number that we could send here so that TACIR's first purpose, which we adopted in the bylaws under those that they could maintain their first purpose and they wouldn't become an ad hoc committee of the House or the Senate. And so the Finance Committee under Chair Lady Hazelwood and I and Gary Hicks at the direction of the Speaker, we limited the number that we had approved. If by doing it the way that we've done it, we've left it up to TACIR to say, yeah, we have room this year to shoehorn this in, or we don't. And this was a way for us to do it, prioritize it in that way. And I spoke with the other members. Some shows, well, he's going to advocate for me to do this anyways, I'll take mine off notice, or they pushed for a vote and they got summer study. So that's kind of the difference between the end result in both of these. But we just didn't want to fill TACIR's docket. The fear would be is that if we did 2 this year and 5 next year and 15 the following year, that their first purpose wouldn't be able to be maintained. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Are there other questions on Amendment 3? It's on the floor, a motion to take up Amendment 3. Are there other questions or comments on this? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chairman, my question is for Dr. Lippert. If your docket gets to a point where projects with no specified date are getting full, to the representative's point of compounding problems, have studies been amended and removed at any point in the history of TACIR?
I'm not aware of a study ever being removed from our docket. Now, in the case of studies that don't have a specified due date, they've certainly been pushed further down the road in the past.
It was a good question. Are there other questions or comments on Amendment 3? The motion is to take up Amendment 3. There is, calling your attention, there is no due date specified on this to give the commission staff a little latitude here. All right, the motion is to take up Amendment 3. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, nay. It carries. Now we're to Amendment 4 to recommend studies related to restaurants licensed or permitted to, I believe, sell liquor by the drink, and the dispensation of those taxes and the permitting. Requested by the Senate, but on the House side, it was taken off notice in the House. Is there a motion to take up Amendment 4? All right, there's a motion to take up Amendment 4. Is there a second? I hear a second. All right. Okay, there is a second then. All right. So it's before our consideration now, members. Do we have any questions or comments? Dr. Lippert has already explained it to us. Do you have any questions, however? And again, this one has a later due date of 2024. There being none, those in favor of the motion to take up Amendment 4, say aye. Those opposed, nay. Carries. Now on Amendment 5, this one, study that related to earmarking DUI fines collected in one county for the use of that county's county-operated ambulance service. This bill is unique in that it was referred by a House subcommittee and it was never calendared in the Senate. Do you have any questions on that one? I have some reservations about this one because the recommendation did not come from the House itself. It came from a subcommittee.
Is it appropriate to make a motion not to receive?
The chair would accept a motion not to receive. There's a motion not to receive with a second. Let's discuss it. Do you have any questions or comments about this one? Representative Williams.
I'm not going to talk on all of them, but I do think this is the point is well made in this instance. Typically, the Finance Committee is the one that would refer bills to TACIR, and I think it was an oversight maybe by the subcommittee chairman to send this to TACIR without it going through Finance. So I won't be supporting this either. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? The motion is not to take this up. Are there other questions or comments? Then we're ready to vote. Those in favor of the motion not to take it up, say aye. And those opposed, nay. The motion not to take it up carries. And let me get us back to our agenda here, members. Hold on here. I believe we are on tab 6. House Bill 366, Senate Bill 1604, right-of-way dedications, the final report by Michael Mount, our research manager, and this is the final report up for approval, so we will be voting on this. I'll defer to you, Mr. Mount.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, my name is Michael Mount. I'll be presenting the Commission's final report on right-of-way dedications for your approval. A lot of this has been touched on already, but I'll be brief in my comments. The draft report was presented at the January 2022 meeting. It was prepared in response to a letter sent by the Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker requesting that the Commission study Senate Bill 1604 by Senator Bailey, House Bill 366 by Representative Williams. Dedications occur when property owners give land or the right to use that land for a local government for public use, for example, a road widening. Senate Bill 1604 and House Bill 366 would have prohibited local governments from requiring property owners to dedicate land along an existing public right-of-way as a condition of approving any application made to develop the property. It would require local governments to pay for that land that they might have otherwise acquired through dedications without compensating the property owner. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that dedications that are required as a condition of a local government permit approval are constitutional if they pass a two-pronged test developed in two cases, Nolan v. California Coastal Commission and Dolan v. City of Tigard. Because the courts have found that dedications that meet the Nolan-Dolan test are constitutional means for governments to regulate land use, because new developments can and often do add to a community's infrastructure needs and costs, because dedications can help offset these costs so that they do not fall solely on the community's taxpayers, and because of Tennessee's long-standing tradition of local government control regarding land use regulation, the Commission does not recommend the proposed legislation. Some states have laws to protect property owners' rights while maintaining local authority to require dedications. 5 states, Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Minnesota, and Utah, have incorporated the language of the Nolan-Dolan test into state statute, which provides guidance to local governments to help ensure that the dedications they require meet the Nolan-Dolan test. Based on the actions taken by these other states to protect property owners' rights while maintaining local authority to require dedications and to provide guidance to local governments, the draft version of this report that was presented at the January meeting recommended that the General Assembly should codify into state law the Nolan-Dolan test, the constitutionally based standard that has been established and applied by the U.S. Supreme Court for dedications. And this year, in response to the draft recommendation, Senator Bailey and Representative Williams introduced into the General Assembly, and the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 2849, House Bill 2274, and as mentioned before, it became Public Chapter 1128, and it was to incorporate the language from the Nolan-Dolan test into Tennessee's statutes. It prohibits regional and municipal planning commissions in exercising their platting power from requiring an owner of private property to dedicate real property to the public or pay money to a public entity in an amount that is determined on an individual and discretionary basis unless there is an essential nexus between the dedication or payment and a legitimate local government interest, and the dedication or payment is roughly proportional both in nature and extent to the impact of the proposed use or development of the property. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Mount, do we have questions? I'm sure we have questions or comments. Are there questions for the presenter? Are there questions? If you would, before I think a voice vote is required on this one because it is the final report which requires approval. If you don't mind, just in a brief summary fashion, reprise the recommendation of the report.
Okay, so just to recap, perhaps the confusing thing here is that the draft recommendation was followed when the General Assembly enacted Public Chapter 1128, and so the report just reflects the fact that that was passed. However, the recommendation that the General Assembly not enact Senate Bill 1604 and House Bill 366 remains unchanged.
All right.
So that's
Representative Williams.
Thank you. Just wanted to take an opportunity to say thanks to the staff for their diligence and hard work on this. Prior to me submitting the original bill 3 years ago regarding the subject matter, I had never heard of the Nolan-Dolan test. And so this was a good opportunity where TACIR and its staff intersects with what we're trying to do in legislative bodies, not just to do what's in the best interests of local government, state government, but also in the best interests of the citizens. I think this was a good compromise. I still think there are some work to be done around the subject matter, and I look forward to using some additional resources that you guys have done in order to do that. But I want to take an opportunity to say thank you. Senator Bailey and I had worked for many years trying to find a solution that worked for the citizens and municipalities, and I think this splits the baby, if you will. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Are there other comments or questions? I take it we're ready for a vote, and we will, the vote to approve the report. Those in favor will say aye. Yes, we had a motion from Senator Yarbrough. Yes, okay, that's right. And a second from Mayor Brooks. Will second. Okay, thank you. Now, we were looking at the audience probably caught on quickly to those parliamentary machinations that was going on up here. We will restart the vote again after the motion and the second were made of record. Now that the motion is properly made and seconded, those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. It carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. See, that's how we do it. He said, you didn't know when you said something was going to, you were going to do it. It just took me a second. You didn't know you got it. Okay. I believe now what we've all really been looking forward to, or I think we have next scheduled under tab 7, is a panel discussion of some very distinguished and learned ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to ask Dr. Matthew Owen, who is our Director of Policy, if the panel will come to the front and take your seats. I will defer to Dr. Owen to introduce the panel and lay out the ground rules.
So as our panelists come take their seat, first, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members. As the chairman said, my name is Matt Owen, and today I will be introducing our panel for the Commission's study of state grants to local governments. You can find the materials related to this panel behind tab 7 in your docket books. Responding to a request from Chairman Yeager at its June 2021 meeting, the Commission directed staff to review the post-award and implementation processes for state grants to local governments and identify any changes warranted to streamline these processes so that grants may be more effectively utilized. Issues raised by Commission members at that meeting and by local officials in subsequent interviews with staff are not limited to single grant programs or to single state agencies. As part of our ongoing review for this project, at our January meeting, you may remember that we heard from panelists representing local governments and a development district who discussed issues in the post-award phase that affect grantees' ability to utilize grants, as well as examples of programs and processes that they consider to be best practices. Following on from that discussion, today, we have invited representatives from several state agencies to discuss issues of concern for grants management, including compliance with state and federal requirements, as well as their own perspective on best practices. Additionally, we've invited a representative with the Department of Finance and Administration specifically to discuss a new grants management system that the state has procured and is in the early stages of making available to some agencies that have expressed interest in it. Our panelists today, we have 5 panelists. You will hear from Brooksy Carlton, the Assistant Commissioner of Community and Rural Development with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. Brian Kriske, the Legislative Procurement Compliance Manager in the Office of Management Services with the Tennessee Comptroller of the Treasury. Kimry Grant, the Transportation Manager in the Local Programs Development Office with the Tennessee Department of Transportation. Ann B. Marshall, Director in the Recreation Resources Division for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. And Clyde Phillips, the Enterprise Resource Planning Project Director for the Tennessee Department of Finance and Administration. Panelists have been asked to keep their opening remarks to no more than 5 to 7 minutes to help facilitate discussion with the Commission. And on behalf of Commission staff, I want to thank all of our panelists for working with staff throughout our project and for being willing to be here today. We really appreciate that a lot. One last bit of housekeeping, I think it's been mentioned, but just to bring it up again, the plan for this project at the moment is for staff to present a draft report for review and comment at the Commission's next meeting. So unless there are any questions for me, I'm going to turn things over to our panelists.
I do have one thing that you're probably already aware of. I think we're taking the panelists in the order on the calendar in alphabetical order, whether it matters or not. I think that there was one name out of alphabetical order.
Yes, there we have, yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't really matter,
my
but I
ordering
tell you.
skills are less than IW. Yes, we can take them in alphabetical order. So that, for our first panelist, that would be Director Ann B. Marshall with the Recreation Resources Division in the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Did I? My last name? All right. Sorry. You see, now I just, that's why you don't ask me to do things. Cliff just tells me what to do, and I just say it. All right. So, excuse me. Yes, our first panelist, Brooksy Carlton, Assistant Commissioner Brooksy Carlton with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development.
Okay, I think I'm on now. It's good to see so many friends here today. Glad to be here. I am going to stay on time, but I think a lot of you know that I have been managing grants for a very long time, and I can talk about this for the rest of the afternoon, but I will keep it brief. So, Brooksy Carlton, I am with Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. I manage all of our rural development programs. So we do everything from industrial site development to downtown development. We do tons of water and sewer grants. We buy fire trucks. We have a huge array of programs that we manage. I wanted to talk with you about a couple of concerns that came up when we talked to Matt and his team about this. One of the ones that I think is really relevant today is regarding federal requirements versus state requirements. So our broadband program that the legislature has funded for several years has been a state grant program. It has been very easy to manage. It's been very easy to run. It's been very popular. We always get tons of grant applications. It is now moving to a federal program. So what that means is the communities are going to have to do environmental reviews that they've never have to do. For the bipartisan infrastructure law funding that's coming, they're going to have to do Davis-Bacon wage compliance. And there are several other compliance areas that our broadband grantees are going to have to consider that they've never had to do before. I think that's important. I think that's one of the things I wanted to look at is how compliance issues, and that's one that's going to hit our communities really hard. It's going to slow down the timeline for executing the grants, and it's going to make them more expensive. To be just completely frank about that. I think another thing that came up in our discussions is the different federal requirements. I can give you an example of that. I have just applied for a DOT grant that ECD got to help one of our communities. And I have been working with grants for a very long time, and there are so many differences between even what's required from DOT to HUD to EDA to EPA. And the specific example of that is the environmental review process. When I started the application process, I had no idea that DOT, US DOT, did not cover the environmental review process as part of their grant funds. And so ECD had to go in later and figure out how to do that. I think that's a problem that you can't really address, is that every federal department has different requirements, but it's something that is important to these grants that we help the communities manage and that they're managing. There are a couple of issues with the state programs I just want to highlight. Cliff is going to talk about one of them, but one of them is, I'll just touch on it briefly, is the state's grants management system. I think we need to keep up with the technology, that a statewide grants management system is very needed, and we're working on getting that in place. I do think it is going to go too slowly. I think we're getting behind, and I think the state needs to have a comprehensive state's grants management system. Another thing that's important is the incredible amount of funding that the state and the local communities are getting right now from the federal government. There's so much money out there. As I mentioned, we're over the broadband programs. The broadband programs will definitely get over $1 billion over the next 5 years from the federal government, probably closer to $1.5 billion for broadband. That number is staggering considering we started out our broadband program with $10 million. So that is an incredible amount of money. And I think that the state needs to keep talking about how we can keep up with the federal money that we're getting. I am supportive of not growing government, but we have to keep up with how much money we're getting, or we put our communities at risk of noncompliance. We put ourselves at risk of not being able to keep up. And it makes us not able to be innovative in implementing the grants if so much of our time is focused on paperwork rather than innovative ways to implement the grant fundings. And then I'll share one best practice that I think our department has. We created an advisory board with our community development block grant program. It's made up of administrators, engineers, and locals. It's hard to keep the locals involved because mayors come and go, but we do like to have locals on that advisory board. We meet a couple of times a year. They help us with scoring. They guide every change that we make to the program. They give us advice. It builds goodwill to have advice and suggestions from the communities coming in. It gives us help. When I started with the CDBG program, I didn't know how sewer systems work. I needed advice on what makes sense. And then just another example of why that was needed. When I first started with the CDBG program, I learned that communities were applying for things that would get funded rather than what they needed. So there's an incredible amount of inflow and infiltration into sewer systems across the state. But those applications weren't scoring well, so communities were expanding their sewer systems. They were applying to expand their sewer systems because that's what got funded, that's what scored well. We saw that as a huge problem. So we have changed, with the guidance of this advisory board, we have changed our funding and our scoring to make sure that, and the goal of this advisory board has always been to make sure that we fund the right projects. So I'm happy to talk more about any of those, but I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Okay, good afternoon. I'll try again. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you very much for your time today and for the invitation to participate in the discussion on post-award in the implementation process for grant contracts. Of Management Services. Our section within the Comptroller's Office is responsible for conducting compliance reviews of procurements and contracts that require approval by the Comptroller pursuant to Tennessee Code Annotated Section 4-56-108. These are specifically our procurements and contracts that fall under the authority of the Central Procurement Office and that we review for compliance with procurement statutes as well as Central Procurement Office rules, policies, and procedures. Under the authority of that same statute, and as it relates to grant contracts specifically, our office is required to review grant contracts that have a maximum liability in excess of $5 million. That amount may be increased or decreased by the Procurement Commission, which many of you all know is a policy-making body in this state established by statute. It is composed of the Commissioner of the Department of General Services, the Commissioner of the Department of Finance and Administration, and the Comptroller of the Treasury. The Chief Procurement Officer is also a non-voting member of that commission. The Comptroller's Office is also responsible for the audit of state agencies, colleges and universities, and local governmental entities, and participates in the general financial and administrative management and oversight of Tennessee state government. As it relates to the post-award of grant contracts, that is largely conducted through our audit process, and that being an audit function. The procurement compliance section that I work in reviews contracts after they have been awarded, have been signed by both parties, and are being routed for all required approvals. Just a couple of general points. As it relates to the post-award and implementation process in general, that by and large across the state and talking with our auditors is a management decision or management function. Those procedures can vary by agency, and they can also vary within various divisions within the same agency. That's not to suggest that that should be changed, but one of our auditors' objectives when they go in is they have to understand that process before they move forward, and then once they understand that process, they can institute those audit procedures in that way. The only other point I wanted to make is I also want to acknowledge legislation that passed this year by the General Assembly that our office believes will aid state agencies with grant monitoring as well as assist our office with audits. And that is Public Chapter 733, which requires that the Chief Procurement Officer on or before March 31 of next year, 2023, establish and maintain a central database of information regarding grant recipients and subrecipients for monitoring purposes. It also requires that all state agencies use that database and keep it updated pursuant to requirements set forth by the Chief Procurement Officer and approved by the Procurement Commission. So that really concludes my comments. I will be happy to try to address any questions that you have today. I'll preface by saying I'm not an auditor with our division. We do review it for compliance, but I'll do my best to answer any questions in that regard. And if I can't do that today, I'll be sure to get that information to you.
Thank you, sir. And what we will do, members, is at the conclusion of all the individual presentations, we will take questions at that time. So if you'll make a note of the questions you may have. And we'll now continue on our agenda.
All right, good afternoon. I am Kimmery Grant, the Transportation Manager for the Local Programs Office with the Tennessee Department of Transportation. I'll do my best to keep this as brief as possible. I know there's a presentation and that may be almost impossible. I'll keep it as brief as possible. So we're the Local Programs Office, and what we do in the Local Programs Office is we administer locally managed projects. We have approximately, I did a search this morning, about 600 locally managed projects ongoing right now. We serve as a liaison between TDOT and these local agencies. That includes all 95 counties, 346 cities, MPOs, RPOs, as well. We assist the local governments with understanding federal and state processes. We generate the contracts between TDOT and the local governments. And then we also review and pay invoices in our office to reimburse the local governments because our process is a reimbursement process. And I did a quick search this morning. Last year, we processed and paid 1,369 invoices. This is just a quick snapshot of our org chart. That's a lot of invoices, a lot of projects, not a lot of people, but we get it done, and we have some pretty passionate people in our office that are devoted to these projects. I won't go through all these. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the federal programs, most of the federal programs that do come through the Local Programs Office. We love acronyms, so some of us are more familiar with the acronyms. So I've included those just in case. We have STBG, which is probably our more widely used program, but this is just some of the federal programs that come through the Local Programs Office. We also have state programs that are completely state funded. Of course, if you were to mix the state programs with the federal programs, we have had that happen. It federalizes the project, and now we're following the federal process for the entire project. So in our office, we have 6 project phases once these projects come in. The first one is eligibility determination, Nepa phase, design phase, right-of-way construction, and closeout. And so what I'll do is kind of go through, what I normally get is, what are the delays and what are the reason for the delays? We get questions like, hey, they've been in NEPA for 3 years. What's going on? It doesn't take that long to review a NEPA document. And so what I'll do is try to kind of quickly cover some of the things to consider, that there are multiple things within these phases. So with those 6, I don't expect y'all to read this. This is our actual local programs process. It is pretty complicated, and there's actually about 200, I think it's about 206 steps. So there's 6 phases, but a lot of steps in the process. And it goes, I think, kind of piggyback off most of our grants that come through our office are federal. So we have processes in place to ensure that local agencies do not lose federal funding for the entire project or for specific phases of that project. So it's a lot of steps, but they're in place to protect the funding. The first phase, like I said, is eligibility determination. It is submitted through our grant system, which is our e-grant system. But some of the delays are caused by not having all of the documents submitted. And so, making sure that those local agencies are responding to those requests for revisions and then to include those documents would kind of speed those processes up, because I'm constantly looking at what can we do to speed the process up. We draft a contract once we have all the documentation needed. And more recently, within the last few years, we have incorporated the Adobe Sign. So that has sped up the contract signing process for a lot of the local agencies as well. I will recommend that the local governments review those contracts for revision and have someone in the local agency that actually knows what the project is to review that contract to be sure that we have included in that contract what the intent is. We have our Nepa phase. I know we get a lot of comments about the Nepa phase. One thing that we often forget is part of the Nepa phase, we send a notice to proceed. So once we get those funds authorized with Federal Highway, we send a notice to proceed to say, local agency, you can begin work. The first thing they have to do is procure a consultant, an engineering firm. So some agencies take a year to procure that firm. Some agencies take 6 months. I recommend to start that procurement process early. You can even start it before we actually give that notice to proceed if they are not needing reimbursement for advertising. But that usually takes a long time, and we kind of forget that that is considered to be part of that Nepa phase. The other thing is the local government is responsible for obtaining most of the information needed to prepare this Nepa document. So while an agency may sit in Nepa for 2 years, part of that was the local government and their consultant firm was actually preparing that document. There are technical studies that have to be done. They have to be submitted to TDOT for review. We send those back, and then that consultant agency still has to prepare the NEPA document and resubmit that. So some of those timelines are dependent on when those documents come in, how quickly did the consultant respond to requests for revisions and comments and things like that. But as you can see, there are some built-in timelines as well. We say, I took this one from one of our NEPA presentations, that there's about 50 calendar days for those technical study reviews, and there's about 50 calendar days for that NEPA document review. And so with those studies, I've heard that I think maybe Native American studies, they have like 120 days to respond and things like that. And so some of those studies also have timelines that are tied to them that we don't have control over, and that they can respond to those coordination letters. So final design phase as well. Once they have received that approved NEPA document, they can go to design phase. There's 3 plan submittals that happen during that design phase. 2 of those plan reviews are preliminary and right-of-way. We have a multi-division review. It comes in, we send it out throughout the department based on the aspects of the project. We approximate 2 weeks for comments to go back to the consultant for the local agency to be incorporated into the next set of plans. Sometimes that varies depending on workload and complexity of the project. We do try to communicate that. Then there's a final right-of-way plan set that comes, and we send that to the regional office. So right-of-way is the other phase that we often hear takes quite a bit of time. Acquisition time frames can obviously vary based on the project. There's public opposition, whether there's utilities that have to be relocated, condemnations, things like that. And so that can vary based on the project. And so we often, get asked, well, how long will it take? And it really just depends on, was the land donated? Is there a lot of negotiations that have to go on? Things like that. So it can really vary. Also, what we forget to consider is that during that right-of-way phase, what we call the right-of-way phase, there's also a submittal of pre-construction documents. So all those documents that have to be submitted before we can say the local agency can go to construction. I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the major milestones we look for. These documents are submitted. We, again, distribute these throughout TDOT for review and concurrence. We approximate a 2-week turnaround on those. Again, it depends on if that local agency or that consultant sends them back to us quickly based on those comments. So once we get them to construction, if the CEI is already under contract, that's great. We recommend doing that earlier on in the process. If not, sometimes that holds up projects if a city is just now getting a CEI under contract. You need the CEI under contract to do your pre-construction conference. Time frames to bid varies. We'll authorize construction, give the go-ahead, and sometimes cities don't move forward. They say, we're not ready, we don't have it in our budget, we can't pay the contractor right now. The time of year can cause delays. So if we send you a local agency to construction in November, asphalt plants may close, and now we're looking at a time frame, or they're waiting to the spring, to begin the work. Utility work may cause conflicts. I've heard local agencies say they were supposed to be moved, they didn't move, they're not moving fast enough and things like that. We also get change orders in that cause delays. Change orders have to have the proper documentation and justification for those, so that way we can get them turned back around quickly and work can continue. And of course, with all of these phases, if there's federal funds on them, that also includes a time frame for federal authorization. So before we go to every phase, we're requesting that authorization from Federal Highway, and that varies depending on the time of the year as well. We also have project closeout, and here is where we kind of run into some issues. Once the project is done, and you may have gotten, or the local agency have gotten their money back, we sometimes struggle with getting those closeout documents so that we can officially close the document out with Federal Highway, and for those state funding ones, just to close them out within TDOT, so now that we can focus our attention on those active projects. So these are just some of the closeout documents that we look for to be submitted to us. Of course, there are project files that must be kept, and we say those project files must be kept for 7 years. So my advice for local agencies that are managing projects through the local programs process is to be familiar with program requirements. We often have local agencies that apply for grants and they're not familiar with the requirements, reporting requirements, and things like that. Or we're used to working with the engineering department, and now the planning department has applied for a grant and they don't know our process. And so now we're working with new people. And that's not a problem, but they need to be familiar with the process. So assigning a knowledgeable project manager also within that agency that knows the local programs process, or that is willing to learn the local programs process. Staying in contact with the hired consultant. We have a lot of small agencies that will hire the consultant and then don't really stay on top of the consultant to move the project. Those consultants have multiple projects, and so it's sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the attention, and that local agency needs to stay on top of that consultant and demand those deliverables. Address comments and suggested revisions. We give those back, and sometimes we get the same document submitted to us, or only some of the comments have been addressed, and so that slows down the process because now there's a back and forth. Securing funding, we'll get closer to construction. We get an estimate from the engineering firm, and now the local agency is stuck. Like, how do we get the money? Where does the money come from? I thought construction would be $1 million. Construction is 1.7. We have seen prices like skyrocket lately. But just kind of making sure they stay on top of those consultants to get an idea of what funding will be required, and to go ahead and start trying to figure out where that money will come from. We have a local programs website. Actually go to the website, look at our forms, there's lots of documents on there to help assist through the process. Invoice regularly. We hear a lot about local agencies not having the money to move forward. If you invoice us, we require contractually to be invoiced at least quarterly, no more than monthly. It is a struggle to get requests for invoices at times. We've gone year, and sometimes a year and a half before an agency will invoice us. So if they invoice us, we can turn that money back around. They can spend that on the next phase or the next invoice they receive. My biggest advice is communication. There are constant changes. We do have people in our office that are dedicated. We want to help. We want to help on the front end before things get too bad where it's kind of harder to fix. And so my biggest thing is just communicate. Like I said, we do have a website. We have a manual. It is pretty lengthy. It's probably 170 pages of our process, but it's a good guide that takes you through the local programs process. And thank you.
Well, Kimmery just gave my presentation, so just kidding. Went through some very key steps, exactly what most of our agencies kind of work with on local and federal programs. But my name is Ann Marshall. I'm the Director of the Recreation Resources Division with our Parks and Conservation Bureau with Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation. So Chairman Yeager, it's great to see you again. I met the chairman my first week on the job in 1990 when we were working with Roane County Park and trying to help Roane County Park with some development and grant issues there. So it's great to see you again. It's great to be here today. I also have a couple of experts in the audience in case you do have some questions that I can't answer. Gerald Parrish has been with our division for over 20 years and is a former director of the division, and also works with distressed counties now and has a lot of grant expertise and technical assistance expertise. Shelby Presley is also with us in the audience. She's our grants program manager. So I'm going to take a little bit, I guess, of a different approach and just tell you a little bit about who we are, why we do what we do, and then talk about our various state and federal programs. But we do kind of follow along exactly what some of the other speakers have talked about as far as requirements and criteria, and I think a lot of that is how we word those things and how we present those things to our local government customers. But basically, our division throughout the last year has really gone through kind of a restructuring process. So we've realized that in order to do our job effectively with cities and counties and state parks, that we have a staff that is effective and trained to do the jobs with regards to grant management and grant administration, as well as the technical assistance side and the planning side. So basically what our division does is provide planning, technical assistance, and grant services to local governments and to state parks. So that can come in the form of workshops, training workshops, assessments, going out and meeting one-on-one with those mayors, with those parks and recreation directors. We also have the Greenways and Trails program that we administer across the state, and that's linked specifically to our Recreation Trails program and our Greenways and Trails Council, that is our stakeholders group that we work with there. And then we also develop and implement the statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or the SCORE, which is required by the National Park Service, that every state do one of those every 5 years in order to meet the eligibility requirements for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So basically why we do what we do, it's pretty foundational when we talk about the parks and recreation field and parks and recreation profession. So when we're spending public dollars and public funding on public lands, we feel that we do have a commitment to steward those dollars in the most responsible way. So we do have requirements that we adhere to that are federal requirements, as has already been discussed here, that the federal government through the Department of the Interior may place on us. A lot of those deal with planning and environmental clearance. The environmental clearance process is quite lengthy. One of the things that the National Park Service has done through the Department of the Interior this year, though, has gone through more of a pre-application phase and a step-by-step application phase with the states in order to take some more time to train us and train the states on how those processes can work and how they can help us implement those processes, but it is up to the states. We don't get additional dollars at this time to implement those environmental clearance phases or any of the responsibilities that are tied with the requirements of the program. We hope that in the future we will be receiving some administrative dollars, but we don't at this time. Parks and Recreation projects also set aside facilities, parks programs, land and open space for future generations in perpetuity. So that's one of the reasons why National Park Service requires us to do a SCORP or a statewide plan. That is also why in turn, we require the local governments, communities, and even state parks to have some type of a system-wide master plan for parks and recreation, some type of comprehensive plan, a park management plan that shows what the goals are for the future, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. They are also stewards of these dollars as they receive them, and we want to make sure that they're going towards the priorities that are set forth in that community. The benefits of parks and recreation are also endless. I'm sure many of you through the years have heard about how parks and recreation helps spur economic activity, economic success. It's related to health and wellness and physical activity. It builds safer neighborhoods. It also has a lot of environmental benefits. So you all have a handout in your packet that talks about Parks and Recreation as essential services, and that is one of the things that our staff really feels strongly about and that we promote wholeheartedly. How we do what we do, that's when it comes to our staff. We have a staff of 12, 2 vacant positions currently. 4 of those staff are our Parks and Recreation Technical Advisory Service consultants. They're based in regions across the state, East, Middle, and West. They are the ones that provide the Parks and Recreation technical assistance. So when it comes to designing your project, making sure that all of the plans are ADA compliant, playgrounds are safe, are designed in a safe way and installed in a safe way, are the specifications for the ball field or the pickleball courts or whatever it is they're building, are they being built according to the right specifications? That's what that staff goes out and handles and works one-on-one with our customers on. The grant management section, which Shelby manages, they are the ones that work across the state also, and we're fully staffed now. We have 3 new staff members that just started last fall, and Shelby has done an excellent job in kind of building that team and also placing them in a region so that they now have responsibility to work with a certain number of counties across the state, depending on, what project they might have. We manage the local Parks and Recreation Fund, which is a state program through the real estate transfer tax, the Recreational Trails Program through Federal Highway, which is a federal program for trails and greenway development, and then the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as I mentioned earlier, through the Department of the Interior National Park Service, is also a federal program. So as I mentioned, staffing has been an issue for our division. We were without a full grant staff for almost 2 years. So now that we've been restructured, we have 3 positions covering the state, and a grants analyst 3 that was recently promoted into our grants manager position. We think that as far as staffing and being able to manage and administer these programs statewide, we're in a position to do a much better job because we have that staff. Kind of following up what Brooksy had mentioned earlier, having the people to manage those programs is so important. If you don't have the administrator level with the department in order to help educate and help kind of hold their hand in some cases, or just help manage the program through the system, then it becomes very difficult. Some of our local governments utilize the development districts or hire A&E firms to help manage their projects, and that works in a lot of cases, but they also have to be trained. We do utilize the grant management system, the online grant management system. We were probably the first department to do that. With our 2018 cycle, we began using the Smart Simple grant management system. I will tell you, there are some people out there that absolutely hate it, and there are some people that love it. But the good thing about it is it's like anything. It's like we felt when Edison came out several years ago, and we had to start using an online enterprise system for timekeeping and travel claims and all these other things. Everybody was going, oh, it's not going to last a year. It'll be gone. And then we got used to it, and we practiced it, and we started using it, and we realized how beneficial it was. So the grant management system is the same way. You have to be in there using it, kind of practicing it. But the good thing about it is it keeps everything together within that grant record or within that grant project. Everything is all in one place. And it's very easy for the applicant to follow the tabs along the way and submit all of those things that Kimry talked about. It's all those things that, the application, from the application to the environmental clearance documents to Title VI certification, everything that's required or what that important criteria is all in that system. It's a matter of uploading and checking a box and submitting. And then our staff can read those things and communicate back and forth with the grantee. So we have found that it's been very beneficial. There definitely is a learning curve to it for some people. And we have even offered training for 4 or 5 of our staff, including Gerald, have actually gone across the state and offered grant management training sessions one-on-one with our communities. Sometimes we've pulled a couple together that have met together, and sometimes we've done it virtually, but it really has assisted us and them in learning how that system works and how it can benefit them. So just in general, just some overall general information for all of our programs. Most of the time we have our programs all in one cycle, so we don't offer our programs, our grant applications separately. We allow the local governments to apply all at one time. So if you're applying for recreation trails, LPRF, LWCF, you're applying all at one time. And then we can decide based on your project and your matching dollars what program best fits you, and that'll be the program that you're funded out of. All programs require a match, 50-50 match, with the exception of RTP, which is 80-20, and their match can be cash, in-kind donations, land in a lot of cases. So we're very flexible there on what the match can be. We do hold our cycles every other year on odd-numbered years with usually a spring award date, a fall application date, and then a spring award date. That may change as we're kind of in the same situation as Brooksy mentioned with ECD. We've got a lot of state LPRF dollars to spend, and we're getting $5 million more a year from Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so we may go to an annual cycle beginning in 2024. So Again, all of our programs are administered and managed through the Smart Simple Grant Management System, or GMS. And if applications are selected for funding, the land must be publicly owned and a notice of limitation of use be placed on that land parcel's deed, protecting the land in perpetuity for public recreation. There are certain instances where we do allow leases between two or more public entities. As far as eligibility, any local government that does not have a current open grant can apply for any of our grant projects. State Parks and Natural Areas is eligible for the 2 federal programs, the Land and Water Conservation Fund and RTP. Federal government agencies and 501c3 organizations are also eligible for the Recreation Trails program. And we encourage joint applications. Joint applications are encouraged and allowable. 2 cities can go in together, a city and a county, a local government, a nonprofit. So there are a lot of different ways that these eligible entities can apply. Then I've given you all a sampling of some of our eligible projects. This is by no means an inclusive list. Playgrounds, athletic fields, splash pads, fishing piers, boardwalks, all kinds of trail construction facilities, picnic areas, nature centers, community centers. Pickleball courts is really a big trend right now. We're seeing a lot of projects coming in for that, and repurposed tennis courts. I do want to mention that one of the things we've realized too that can help us do a better job with requirements, criteria, what would make it easier on our local governments is to reestablish our grant review committee, similar to Brooksy's advisory committee. So Shelby is in charge of that grant review committee. They'll be meeting for the first time in August before our next fall cycle. It was a mechanism we had in place around 2004. I think we did it between 2004 and 2008. And for some reason, it went away, and it's being brought back. We feel that that's a very good way to get diverse input from across the state at all different levels of government, and including development districts and A&E firms. Everybody that touches our grants, we want to have representation on that grant review committee as we move forward before we release our next grant cycle to see if we can continue to make improvements. We're always open to process improvements. We have been spending a lot of time on that over the last year as we've gone through this restructure and added staff. So it's been a pleasure to be here with you today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Clyde Phillips. I'm the ERP Director within Finance Administration, the ERP Division, part of STS. As far as the journey we've had on grants management, in 2020 there was a study that the...
I'm sorry, is your mic on?
I thought it was.
It may just not be close enough.
Bring your mic a little closer to you.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So in 2020, the customer-focused government did a study and recommended that we have an enterprise grant management system there for the state. And that would be first to help the state agencies and also help the grantee community have one landing page where they could go to determine grant opportunities for that local government or that not-for-profit. As far as benefits of a system, a single landing page for the grantees. Look and feel for the system would be the same for the agencies and for the sub-grantees. They wouldn't have to. We were going into a cycle that seemed like where every agency was trying to implement their own system, and so with in the way we thought we were going into it, every agency would have their own landing page, their own system, and the sub-grantees would, the cities, counties, not-for-profits, would have to figure out how to navigate those different places. With the system we're looking at, the sub-grantees could track their applications and their reimbursements better. There are some agencies today that are paper-based. Email back and forth and mail files. This system is searchable across the agencies. It reduced the cost to implement a single system as opposed to multiple systems. It would reduce the training time for when people transfer from one agency to another agency. As far as how the system works overall, it'd be the same, so they wouldn't have to be trained on that. They'd have to train on the complexities of that grant process instead, because every grant agency, as you've heard so far, has they kind of do the same thing, but there's different processes everybody uses, and also different lingo. Also developing the interfaces to Edison and also federal systems. We do that one time, not numerous. Interfaces would reduce the need for double keying and reduce the risk of keying errors. It's easily configurable to make changes based on evolving grant requirements, and also the system would be flexible. It needs to be flexible enough to handle the different grant requirements of the different agencies. Risk and challenges to this. First off, when you're migrating to a new system, the first question is, are you converting your data or not? If you're converting your data, what kind of shape's it in? Will it, is it going to take a while to get that converted because the data is in poor quality, or do you start fresh with your new grants? Another risk is staff buy-in. Staff have to buy in enough to help us document the requirements for their grant system. They have to be actively engaged in the testing effort to make sure that the system meets their needs and that there's no bugs in it. And also then the implementation effort. They have to be engaged and help us with the implementation. Another risk is staff turnover. When you lose staff, you lose that knowledge, and also it slows the effort. So what have we accomplished so far? Labor and Workforce Development was a pilot agency for us. We went live in May, mid-May of this year with Workforce Services. What have we done with that system so far? We've interfaced with Edison, the supplier information, that's the vendor information, address, the Edison number, et cetera. We've interfaced vouchers from that system to Edison, purchase orders, also interface the payments from Edison back to the system so that when the cities, counties, et cetera, are looking in the system, they can see that the payment has been made, or likewise that the payment has not been made yet. And also we've done an interface with the IRS, and that was to help verify the not-for-profit status of not-for-profits. Other functionality we've added, single sign-on with Edison, so that you sign on Edison for the employees, sign on one time, and you're into both applications. Solicitations and applications, scoring of applications, the award process, reimbursements, and then the workflow process. As far as the current effort, we're working with F&A. There are two divisions in F&A we're working with. And they have 4 go-lives. The first one is in August with solicitations. The second was with contracting, then reimbursements, and then monitoring and reporting. The additional functionality we're adding with finance administration is interfaces for general ledger, and that's where if a state agency has applied for a grant to the agency, we don't want to cut that state agency a check. We want to do a journal entry process. Also, FileNet for attachments. You've heard several people say today that they have all these documents that are coming in from the application process. That's to attach those so they can be viewable online. An interface with grants.gov so that the state agencies can look for new grant opportunities with the federal government. A interface with the Postal Service to validate the address information. And then an interface with for SAM.gov for validation of the DUNS numbers, which is currently fixed and changed to another numbering system, but still SAM.gov would manage that. And then we're also adding contracting functionality, which would include all the various grant templates. As far as other agencies that have expressed interest so far, another division in labor and workforce, that's going live in October. Then finance administration with 2 divisions, agriculture, children and youth, environment and conservation, an upgrade from the current version, and then economic community development. The next steps for us, continue to working with F&A, begin working with agriculture in July, and then work with the other agencies throughout the fiscal year, attempting to get everybody, if we can, live by the end of the year. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all on this.
Be happy to take questions or comments at this time from any of the members.
Oh, boy, do I have one.
All right, Mayor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. My staff is texting me, asking me to be nice. So, first of all, thank you for the hard work that you're doing, but I have 898,000 reasons to ask this question because I just had to resend that money back to you this week. It was a very difficult letter to write. My friend Neil Hansen, whom works with you, Ms. Grant, but I had a few questions as you all gave your presentations. The first of which is, even with my 2.75 readers, I can't read that chart. So I would love to get this electronically and try to explain. And this, in fact, might be part of the problem, is that we have to go through all this for a grant that was given to me when I was a member of the House. Mr. Chairman Williams mentioned I'm a recovering legislator, and that grant was awarded to Cleveland TAP when I was here as a legislator. I've now completed 4 years of mayor. We still don't have the sidewalks, and we took so long with the Nepa process, we had to give the money back, and someone else gets to have it. And there's sidewalks off of a main thoroughfare to a residential church area. You cannot imagine how important these sidewalks are for the kids and for the Clevelanders. So it was a very difficult letter for me to have to write last week. In fact, I challenged it as my staff asked me to write it. So I was thrilled to hear Ms. Carlton and the comprehensive state grant program. I was thrilled to hear Mr. Phillips talking about a new possible single enterprise grant. If I were still a member of the legislature, I would not ask for the departments to consider it. I would insist that we streamline this because I'm not the only person. In fact, I asked my staff, in addition to the almost $1 million we gave back last week, how often does this happen? And they regretfully started showing me files of grants that were awarded for whatever reason. I've heard environmental, I've heard NEPA, I've heard TDEC, I've heard TDOT, all the acronyms that were on one of your slides. And I just said, I don't understand. This is to do good. These are trails, these are greenways, these are sidewalks. This is quality of life money. And the quality of life is suffering because of the bureaucracy that we're having to go through. I was thrilled when Chairman Yeager brought this study and this idea forward because I distinctly think that this needs to be talked about, if for no other city or county or area up here for mine personally. The one word that I didn't hear all through the presentations, and I couldn't find it in any of the slides, is a word that we used to use when EDC was right about to sign a deal with Blue Oval or right about to have a deal with Volkswagen. They have fast-tracked funding, and the legislature puts it aside, and if Germany calls, it's quick. But if we need sidewalks, it takes 5 years. That confuses me. So I promised I'd be nice. God bless you. Thank you, Mr.
Any of the panel members like to comment on that, respond? All right, Mayor.
We have certainly appreciated thousands and thousands and millions of dollars that we have received from the various state agencies, and some are understandably, I think, easier to work with and complete grants than others. For instance, I'll just say ECD has always been very easy to work with, and maybe it's because of the state grants, but it seems like broadband is going to be a whole nother story. But, the other day I was looking through our grants, and we have a multimodal grant that dates back to 2016, and we still have not started on it. And it just, we've got another grant that has been sent back. The design has been sent back maybe 8 times to our engineer. This word needs to be changed, and it goes back, and we don't hear anything for a month, and then they've changed that word or that phrase, and they send it back, and then they send it back to them, again, and it just seems like, why couldn't that all be done at once? And things get delayed so much that then you have to do an amendment to the contract to ask for more time. And so, once again, it's delayed. I know we have another multimodal that the state called and said, would you like us to administer the grant? And we thought, well, this is a way to make sure, things stay on task. I have not heard a single word since we told them that, we're going to go this route. As a small town mayor, I'm directly involved in a lot of our grants, and the Title VI requirements for these, I think I have a whole file drawer of Title VI certifications. I don't understand why we just can't have one. Why does every department require a Title VI certification? And I think it used to be 2 years, and now it's like every few months I have to take the test, and it's time away from so much more that needs to be done. So I can take a Title VI, test for a requirement. The environmentals seem to take forever, and I don't know if this SCORT plan, is that federal, Ann, the SCORT plan? So
Yes, it is.
we don't have a choice.
Well, on the SCORT plan, it's really for the state of Tennessee to set its priorities for parks and recreation and conservation across the state. So it helps local governments in looking at that plan and seeing what some of the priorities can be. But really, we put more weight on your local plan than we do the SCORT plan for local projects.
Okay, and for, I think for smaller cities that have, they're involved in mowing and ball fields until the end of the summer. It's kind of hard for the smaller cities with very limited resources to come up with these plans. We're doing the very best we can because we can't afford to pay, an engineering firm $30,000 to do it. But I think that this smart, simple system, or whatever it is, I have tried it. I have had nightmares about it, but it seems like if I don't use it all the time, my ability to get into that goes away, and then I have to start all over again. And of course, that's a big chunk. That's a big chunk of time. So whatever can be done to streamline it, I think when the state can administer it ourselves or yourselves, it's so much smoother and so much more simple. But boy, when you get the federal government involved, it's just, it's a nightmare. And I think a lot of it is people just not being on the same page. Maybe you can't be because that's coming from the federal government and they're so segmented. But thank you. And if anything at all you can do to help, or maybe we're just not getting it, where we're from, maybe we need to start at square one, but thank you.
Mayor, I'll just provide one update. The state does now allow us to accept Title VI certifications from other departments. So we're trying to figure out how to do that. So hopefully soon you will only have one annual Title VI certification.
Because all the tests are pretty much the same.
It's as bad for us as it is for you,
It's
I know.
just
so
crazy.
We're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think, Ms. Grant?
Yes. So I'll start off by saying, first of all, I do understand your frustration. I think, like I said earlier, for me, I've been in this position of managing local programs now for almost 3 years. This July will be 3 years. I've been in local programs now for 10. And I started out managing projects myself in Region 1, working with those communities in Region 1 area. So what I will say is I'm constantly looking for ways to improve the process. I'm probably way more in the weeds than I should be because I started out with, hands-on with the projects, working with the local agencies. So I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. And so my biggest advice, like I said earlier, is communication. And that's where we've seen the most issues, local agencies. And, sometimes the fault is on us and sometimes it's on the local agency. And I don't want it to ever be a finger pointing. It's like, how can we work together? Because these roadways, these sidewalks, they're important for all of us. And so I want to figure out how to work together to get these projects implemented. You've worked hard to apply for the grants, prepare those applications. You've worked hard to go through all those other steps. And so I want to make sure those projects continue forward. When it comes to some of the processes, like I said earlier, that's what I was trying to kind of pinpoint where some of those delays lie. So with Nepa, we say, well, we've been in Nepa, the project's not moving forward. Well, the local agency has to hire a consultant. We can't take 9 months to hire a consultant. I've had agencies where I say, well, we sent a contract, and literally the contract has been with the city for over a year. And so the project will not move forward. And then once the project does move forward, now we're almost at construction. They're like, this project's been waiting for 10 years. And it's like, well, you had the contract for a year and a half before you ever signed it. You took a year to employ the consultant. And then we kind of turn it over to the consultants. And then we kind of get hands off. That doesn't always happen, but it happens very often. And we depend solely on the consultant to move the project, where we have to demand deliverables. We have to ask them, where's the project moving? So I will say we have put things in place. So we do have an online grant system as well. We haven't worked with other agencies as much because, as you saw, our process is extremely complicated. Even within TDOT, the other grant systems they've used didn't fit our needs. We couldn't put everything into that system. According to me, even talking to IT, they said your process is just extremely complex. It's not by choice, I promise you. And so, again, I'm always looking for ways to pull things out of there, but we're constantly getting audited by Federal Highway. We get audited by the state of Tennessee as well, and making sure that we're implementing and doing things that we need to do. So we have that online system. We're now trying to work closer with the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, to identify projects that aren't moving, identify projects so that they can start putting a little bit more accountability on local agencies as well. We have volunteered to come to MPO meetings. We meet with the Memphis MPO, I know, regularly to go through projects. We have a meeting scheduled for the 27th of this month. I just got an email today from the Kingsport Tri-Cities area where we've agreed to sit down and meet with them to discuss their projects. So this way, everybody is in the loop, and we're starting to put some accountability because a lot of times we would get, well, TDOT, we're waiting on TDOT. And then we would say, well, we're waiting on the consultant. And the consultant's like, well, I submitted the document, but you didn't tell them that we gave you comments. So we were kind of having those communication issues. So we're trying to create ways to become more transparent. So you all as local agencies are in the loop of where things actually are. I've instructed my staff, copy the local agency. I know the consultant is who you talk to every day. Copy the local agency so that they know what's actually going on with the project. I'm trying to do everything. I have quarterly. I hold them twice a year, and I require my management staff now to hold meetings In between those, where we actually go through every project, I'm doing it right now. I have Region 3 tomorrow. So we're actually going through every single project in local programs where I'm asking questions, and they'll tell you, they're like, nobody can be prepared for Kimry in these meetings. Because I'm asking questions. Where are the invoices? What do we need to get to the next phase? Have you communicated that to the city? Oh, you emailed, you haven't heard back. Did you pick up a phone? Did you go to the NPO meeting? Because they're at the NPO meeting. Go to the NPO meeting and say, hey, during the break, hey, I need an invoice, I need this, and talk to them, get face-to-face, start building that relationships, so that way we can make sure the local agencies know what we need to move the projects forward. So I'm open to any other suggestions as well. I know that's frustrating with the TAP program. The TAP program is a little bit different. It has its own nuances because of the program it is. So federally, you have to get to construction within 3 years, and those federal funds can be rescinded. We don't have control over that. That's a Congress decision. We don't have control over the fact that TAP funds can be rescinded. But if there's ever an issue with my office, if you notice delays, things like that, I am all ears. I have my contact information here. I have cards. I'm all ears. I got an email the other day. We're struggling with one of our divisions to get comments back, for plans review. I can't do anything about it if I don't know about it. So I'm telling my staff, let me know when we're experiencing these delays. I think part of the issue, like we said, turnover. You saw that process, and you have a very limited staff. I have 7 program monitors who are the direct contacts for cities for these 590 projects. And so this process is huge. And then when you have turnover, you're teaching. If anybody's been through the local programs process, it's not simple. So now you're retraining, and you're trying to get somebody else on board and learn the process. You could go to consultants, you can onboard other people. Again, you're talking about a year training process to get somebody to get them I guess, knowledgeable about what the process is. So, we're trying to do things like that and pay more attention to employees so that we can retain staff as well. Like she said, some things aren't within our control when it comes to staffing and when it comes to hiring. I have vacancies right now. I've probably been screaming for a long time for more employees, but I'm working with what I have. And like I said, my biggest thing is we're here to help you all, so ask questions. If the project's not moving, if you're not sure where something is held up or why, just ask us questions. Follow up. You don't get on our nerves. I probably get 200, 300 emails a day. So it's okay, follow up and just ask those questions, pick up a phone, call us, and we'll be happy to help to try to move those projects forward. And I want to say also with the multimodal, that was an attempt to try to move projects forward. Was the multimodal division. We didn't quite collaborate maybe like we should have within the agency, but that was an attempt to try to move projects forward. What can we do? And so sometimes it's kind of trial and error. Let's figure out if we can do this and will that help? Well, that actually didn't work. And so I've given feedback about that process with allowing the department to manage those projects. And so I'm looking forward to see how that changes as well, but I've also given feedback on that. But that was an attempt to try to move the projects forward.
And I don't know if it would help at all. I don't even know if it's possible. But on the NEPA and some of the different areas that, okay, you turn, if it's requested on this date or you turn it in by this date, then there is you will get a response in say 3 weeks or 2 weeks, that if instead of waiting, for the 2 years, if the city is doing what we're supposed to by a certain date, then we can expect to have that turnaround, on a date. So it's kind of like a checklist where there are no surprises. I don't know if anything like that would be possible.
I can definitely relay that to NEPA. I will say the NEPA office has made a lot of changes to help with that process. We used to have one person kind of working on local programs years ago, but now they have dedicated multiple people to working on just local programs, NEPA documents. Also, if you notice, as soon as we send a notice to proceed, they are in contact with the local agency. Here are the documents you need. Here's what you need to do to move forward. Things like that. So they're definitely being a lot more proactive with getting that NEPA process rolling and letting those local agencies know what they need. Local programs, of course, in my office, believe it or not, we have no engineers in the local programs office. And we also don't actually have really any planners really in local programs. We're very hands-off when it comes to that environmental piece of it. So we're here to, look into it and say, hey, what's going on? What's the status? What do they need? What can we do to help push this along? But far as actual technical studies, things like that, we kind of rely on that environmental division to relay what those response times are and things like that. Like I said, some of them have mandated timeframes that are associated with them. So certain agencies have timeframes that they can respond, and it varies, I think, just depending on which coordination letters you're working on. I'm not as familiar with all of those. We have, if you haven't been to our training lately, we used to have local government guidelines manual, and then we would have a right-of-way. I listened, I heard the concern about Nepa. Now for that second half of the second day of training, we have a Nepa piece, and the Nepa office is there to answer questions and to help guide local agencies through that Nepa piece as well.
Senator Campbell and then Mayor Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Marshall, what is the intermediary authority of the state relative to federal grants getting to localities? In other words, are there federal funds out there that we don't access that would be available to us because they need to come through the state, or is it something that is always available as a pass through?
As far as the Parks and Recreation specific grants and conservation grants, we are the designated agency and have been since 1965 for Land and Water Conservation Fund and Recreation Trails Program. So those are the two federal funding sources that come through our department. There certainly are other federal programs and other foundations and private funding sources out there that cities can just apply directly to, but we are the state sponsor. All the states are called project sponsors for the Department of the Interior, and so we manage the program really on behalf of the National Park Service, but have to follow their guidelines and requirements that are necessary for those programs. So it does add some steps to it for sure. It adds those requirements as they come through from the federal government to the states, and then we have to interface back with the federal government and use their system of applying, making those applications, running through the environmental clearance process. And it can get kind of sticky back and forth. It can add a lot of time to it. But I think with what Mr. Phillips talked about, if there's a way to interface those systems in the future where our GMS can interface with grants.gov, because National Park Service requires our applications to go through grants.gov. Well, that's a whole different system than what we're using on the state level. And so we have to do separate forms. It's a separate application process and everything. But those two programs specifically come to the states. Actually, an RTP comes through Department of Transportation to our department, to just the Recreation Trails piece. They manage the other pieces of the Transportation Act, but the Recreation Trails program comes to us. So.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, as Mayor Holland mentioned, I would be remiss for not thanking you for the other multiple millions of dollars that you all sent to the city of Cleveland. Just so happens I had to send back a little bit of it. The rest of it we're very, very grateful for. So I got to say that. Ms. Grant, you did mention one statement about inviting us to your MPO meetings. So we have a TDOT representative on our MPO. She's a long-range planning Region 2, but do we have the ability to bring or request a local programs person in addition to that to speak to us and to speak to our staff? Is that are you making that offer? Did I understand that, or maybe I misunderstood?
Absolutely invite us. I'm encouraging my staff to go. Like I said, I had staff today, especially Region 3. I'm like, hey, y'all, it's up the street. So they go. Again, of course, depending on the MPO, sometimes we don't know when the meetings are or they get canceled. And if we're going to attend in person, we have to travel. So we've had some that were canceled at the last minute and things like that. But no, I'm encouraging my staff to attend MPO meetings, at least especially that technical meeting, because that's usually where the staff is that we work with most often. And if we need to be requested at executive board meetings, things like that, we're happy to come. I've volunteered several times to come and speak about funding types, speak about processes, just answer questions from what I can on the local programs. Like I said, I'm not an engineer. I'm not as familiar with the TDOT managed projects. But as far as the local program side, I'm happy to always come and speak, and just be available there. But I'm pushing my staff out, especially now that we're in person again. I'm like, hey, y'all need to go to the meetings and try to make an effort to be there.
You'll love Cleveland. I can't wait for you to come.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have 3 in the queue waiting for questions. Mayor Frank, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. One, what I'm hearing is a lot of what you're doing is helping us in local government in terms of compliance with the rules that you didn't create necessarily. And so I'm curious if you think, I know rules and regs have a purpose, and it's usually they arise out of problems or things that have gone wrong. Is there room, or is this a time that we should recommend reset or another look at the rules? Have they gotten too cumbersome? I know it's like an amoeba, they continue to grow. And then my second question is, one of the reasons from local government that we apply for many of the wonderful grants that you all here today manage are because we are funding the general operation of government, the have to. And we use the grants to do these quality of life projects. Are there any opportunities that you all can see to keep more of the grant dollars that are the federal pass-through and prioritize those for the state's own needs? And I'm thinking about this in terms of efficiency, where you have fewer people with the experience and the knowledge to know how to manage those dollars. And then that would free up funds in the state legislature for them to do these quality of life projects and give a little more leeway to local government. I mean, and I don't know if there are those opportunities that exist, but it seems like part of the problem is you have 95 counties that are trying to learn all of these rules, and some of these counties are very small, and even we're about 77,000, but still it's very cumbersome and difficult to learn that. So are there opportunities where the state could maybe just keep more instead of spreading it out across the state, and then our senators and state reps could do more to send to local government?
Respond.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a quick answer for Mayor Frank regarding the state funding versus the federal funding. So when we get the Land and Water Conservation Fund dollars into our state, most of that does go to state parks. It has traditionally over the last 12 to 15 years, because it really has not been enough to allocate out to local governments for them to go through all those headaches of the federal process. So to what you're saying, most of those dollars do support state park projects. Some in the past has gone to local governments, but we really depend on the local Parks and Recreation Fund for the local community projects. And because that's a state program with not a lot of restrictions or requirements, at least through the statute, we have been able to make a lot of process improvements on the state side of our program process. So yes, I think that's what's working for us. Besides, shortening the environmental clearance process, hopefully we can share some of that with the federal government. Maybe they'll be willing to take some of our advice on using an ARIS radius search system and, some other things that we have used on a state level that have made our environmental clearance process this time very, very easy to work through. We still have some lessons to learn, but it's a much easier process than the federal NEPA environmental process.
Thank you. And yes, ma'am.
I will say that the funds that come, especially through TDOT, come from Federal Highway, and so we have an agreement with Federal Highway of providing stewardship and oversight of those funds. And so we're required to make sure all of those milestones, all of those requirements are met for those federal funds. Like our local government guidelines process manual, before I can publish it, it has to be approved by Federal Highway. So all of that, so we're always looking at ways to slim the process where we can, but like I said, Federal Highway has to approve it. We did come up with, a few years ago, an accelerated delivery. Local agencies said, we can do this faster, just give us the money. And then we came up with the accelerated delivery process, and we had 2 agencies. Because what it did was it put the risk back on the agency. So the agencies wanted the federal money but didn't really want the risk. So it put the risk back on the federal agencies. We said, you can go forth, we'll approve the NEPA document, and then we'll give you a notice to proceed to implement your project. At the end, you send us all your bills, and you send us all your documentation that we need for federal highway. We'll review it. If we think it's satisfactory, we'll give you your 80% reimbursement, and then you can move on. We had 2 agencies that did it, and it ended up not being so short because they were so afraid, I think, of not meeting the requirements that it took them a very long time to review those documents. But we're here to protect the funds, and we're here to protect the local agencies. And like you said, y'all have turnover, and y'all have things like that as well. And so we're here to make sure, as you have those turnover, we're not letting you go to the next phase and spend more money without knowing that you've met the requirements for that previous phase. And while it's tedious, but it's there to protect, like I said, it's there to protect the local agencies, and it's there to protect the funds, taxpayer dollars. Like I said, I'm constantly looking at ways to slim it down because, like I said, we have 7 program monitors, 2 supervisors for these locally managed projects, and then 2 managers that are dedicated to 590 projects. So, and you have 95 counties, multiple cities, pulling you tons of different ways. And so I'm always looking at ways to slim it down. But like I said, we have to have that approval from federal highway. A majority of the projects that come through local programs are federally funded. I think I listened to Mr. Paul Deggs talk all the time. We have lots of projects in the hopper that TDOT would love to do. Money and staff, you got to have the manpower and you got to have the dollars. So I think even if we were to kind of pull some of those back, we still don't have enough money to do all the projects that need to be done. And so the local agencies are able to better prioritize their projects for those local agencies that do receive direct dollars and that can apply for grants and things like that. You're better able to prioritize and say, we need this project now. I think some local agencies, and I probably shouldn't say this, have seen, we want TDOT to do the project. We got a lot going on, and so sometimes those projects take a whole lot longer when TDOT's doing it, just to be honest. So that's why a lot of local agencies, even when multimodal asked some of the small cities, would you like for TDOT to do it? Some of those cities were like, no, like absolutely not. We want to do our own project. We know TDOT's going to take too long. And that's just being frank, so most local agencies want to get those projects implemented, and so they'd rather administer them themselves. Hence, our local programs office and the projects there has grown so much because the local agencies say we can do it faster.
Ms. Carlton.
Yeah, I wanted to note that I think we should track the American Rescue Plan funds that TDEC is administering for water and sewer. They were able to, that funding was approved by the Fiscal Stimulus Accountability Group, and they are putting $1 billion of their $1.3 billion of water and sewer into a formula grant where we can do just that. It's sent to your community where you can decide what your priorities are and what you want to do. And that was based on what we heard from the communities. And I think we need to track that and show how effective it is and show how it benefits your community. So if we have an opportunity to do that again, that we can say, we've done it before, it's great, the communities love it, they get to pick what they spend the money on, it just transfers from the state to them. And I think we can show its effectiveness and expand that in the future.
I believe Calvin Clifton is patiently waiting. Okay, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do work for one of those consulting firms that work with these agencies every day. We work with Ms. Carlton and Ms. Grant on a daily basis. And I want to just make a comment to reflect what other folks have already said. I want to commend y'all on what a great job you do looking out for these local governments because they are navigating some very complicated processes, and the number of projects and the number of dollars are just phenomenal. I guess I'd like to ask Ms. Grant, and the guys at my office probably know this answer, but since I'm here, I want to ask, do the processes vary for the federal programs and the state programs, or do the state-funded projects follow the same process because there are federal funds that flow into that? Is that a safe question?
Yeah, we get asked that often. And I mean, when I really look at it, the processes aren't very different because TDOT does mimic a lot of the requirements, which why we have some of the best roads in the country, but we do mimic a lot of the requirements that federal highway has. What does get kind of chiseled off is that time to authorize funds, where usually before you go to a phase, you're looking at several weeks, just to get those funds authorized through federal highway. There are some exceptions we make, I think, sometimes with state funds. Like I'll have a city come to me and say, we plan to use, LIC funds or something like that. As soon as we have a contract in place, we kind of let them hit the ground running a little bit quicker on certain things. NEPA is still very much required. We say we have a tier document, but from my understanding, is not very different than the NEPA requirement. It absolutely doesn't have to have federal highway approval, so that does chisel some time off of it. But some of those studies are still required for the tier document, which is for state funds. So most of the process is still the same, especially through local programs. I haven't seen too many places where it's very different.
Okay, one other quick question, and I hear this from the clients a lot. Why do resurfacing projects require a NEPA document and right-of-way certification? Because you're really not disturbing anything. You're just milling off a top surface and resurfacing it. So why are those required? I hear that a lot.
That NEPA document is a federal requirement, so there is no way to move forward. It does change what type of NEPA document may be needed. And most NEPA documents, now don't get me to being an expert on that, categoric exclusions, most of the ones that come through local programs are probably the more simple NEPA document. But again, all those studies, all that coordination still has to happen. Like I said, there's, time frames set with all of those. Even if it's not disturbing, you have to basically certify that you're not disturbing anything. Right-of-way certification, we require right-of-way certification even if there's no right-of-way being required on every project. And sometimes we'll look at plans and we'll say, hey, you have to either improve it for ADA or something like that, and maybe you are encroaching on someone's, or you need an easement or something like that, but you have to certify as a local agency. And it should be pretty simple just to say, we are not, here's our plans, we are not, touching anyone else's right-of-way, anything like that, no easements, no acquisitions required. It shouldn't be a long process. I'm looking forward, when I get a little bit of extra time, to work with like the regional right-of-way office and kind of see like, what does that process exactly look like? Is there time that we can shave off in that process as well? Because again, local programs is very hands-off when it comes to right-of-way, because that is the most critical part of the project. If you have issues in right-of-way, you can lose funding on the entire project, not just for that phase. And so we allow our right-of-way experts out at the regions to really deal with that right-of-way phase. But I can work with them to kind of see where we can pull some things off of that part.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mayor Bickers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up a little bit on Mayor Holland's comments. You look back at the 2020 census data in Tennessee, of the 470 cities, 360 of them have a population of less than 5,000. So we're very much dominated by what I would call smaller cities. I suspect very few of those 360 municipalities have a full-time employee or even a part-time employee dedicated to identifying grants, applying for grants, and monitoring those grants. And while I bet if we ask our members of the state legislature representing those 360 cities when you all were doing this work, do you intend for those cities to have equal opportunity and access to grant money? They'd all say yes. But the reality is, I would suggest that's not necessarily true, because when you look at the different grants spread throughout the different agencies, the different application processes, the different monitoring processes, the different reporting processes, there are many of them that these smaller cities look at and say, we don't have the time and the resources to go through all of that. And so the money doesn't get where many of these legislatures, I believe, want it to go. And so I would suggest that part of what we ought to be doing is trying to identify, is there an inherent bureaucratic bias or barrier to grant monies being available to these, what I would call smaller cities. Cities, whether you're 5,000, 2,000, or 6,000, you're generally a smaller city. And we ought to be looking at how, and I appreciate the concept and the belief that you need to be good stewards of our money. All of us up here understand that. But we also have another role, not just to be stewards of the money, but to make sure the money goes to the purposes for which the taxpayers have authorized it through the legislature or other means. So I would hope as we move forward with this that we try to identify what are any of these barriers. I will tell you, we just went through the new TDEC stormwater process in our county, and it worked wonderfully well. it was shocking that the different governments could come together and reach agreement on here's how we think that money ought to be spent without having to go through individual grant applications and all of that. Now, I realize that took some sense of control over how it's spent and the administration of it away from the state and pushed it more to the county level. But if that experience is representative of how things can work, it may be the state, maybe the state, we ought to see whether the state should explore that or legislature should explore whether there ought to be ways to do it. But it's, I appreciate what you all do, but there's got to be a way that we can make it less complicated and make it more user-friendly for what 360 is more than 75% of our municipalities. My math is right. I'm not very good at math, but if it's right. And if that's the case, shouldn't our method of doing that be focused on the majority of our cities and not a minority? And that way, can we not make sure that all of our citizens, whether they're in a large city or a small city, have the opportunity for these grants, many of which do wonderful things, improve quality of life, but let's just make sure we're equitable and we don't have a bureaucratic barrier to achieving those goals. And hopefully this committee, when we do that, Mr. Chairman, we can explore whether or not that exists in ways that we can remedy it. Thank you.
All right. I think Mayor Anderson is waiting. Did you? Brooksy?
I
You
was
have
just
a
going
comment for the
to
mayor?
comment on that I think there are a few things that the state, that we can be doing, things that hopefully ECD does well. One thing is we always put admin money into our grants so that if a community doesn't have the staff to administer a grant, they can hire somebody to help them with that. I think that's important. And then the other thing that we try to focus on to make sure that doesn't happen is our scoring process. We give extra points in 95% of our grants to more distressed communities that don't have the capacity on their own to do a grant, so that they are more likely to get a grant than a community who just is able to hire a really expensive grant writer.
Thank you. Now, Mayor Anderson and then Councilman Carlisle.
Well, my remarks will be short. You pretty well summed up what I was going to say. I'll give you an example that I know you all don't handle it, but under the ARPA funds, which all county mayors had to have their picture taken, Social Security number, and cities, everything had to be on permanent record. So throw everything out the window. And in reading through that, I sent it over to the attorneys. And one of the requirements under the federal grant that comes to the state that comes to me is that all subcontractors have to have a texting policy. Now, I don't have any clue how many contractors we do, so everything immediately went on the hold, and we had to figure out how many subcontractors that would use these funds would have to have a texting policy, which is against the law in the state of Tennessee to text and drive. And that, to me, just sounds so silly, but we did that. Out of that, I had to hire a grant person. Out of that, I had to have a grant oversight person to use these funds, which fortunately, the funds, you could use that. But I was already deep $250,000 before I could touch the first funds. So my prediction, my comments are the very same the good mayor said over here and to several of the others. The next, there was a cartoon character several years ago, don't take this personally, that we found the enemy. He's us. And we can't get the paperwork out based on all the regulations, whether it's federal or state. I get all that. You're covering your base. When the consumer calls me, I cover my base. But surely there's a way we can figure this out and get these projects out in a much more timely fashion. I've used every one of you. All of you are great. I love the dollars. I can't wait to see the state legislators approve your function so that we can all have one site to go to. That would be wonderful. So my message to those men and women sitting up here, fine-tune it and let's get it approved, and let's help these cities and counties that we all need these dollars. And my final comment, Mr. Chairman, it's pretty apparent to me Washington's going to send more restricted dollars down over the next few years through grants. And we're just going to have to learn how to wade through that, and we need to be on the front end because I really believe the broadband problem, if the governor's right and you all are right and we're right, that's going to be the number one headache, getting broadband out to all of our communities, either in small cell, fiber. I mean, you have, unless you deal with that, you know that's true. She's been down to our office. Her staff's been down there. I thought working with water utility districts was a nightmare. When you've got 6 or 7 of them like we've got in our area, you can't even get them to come to the meeting place when you're giving them money. Broadband's next. That's my comment.
Thank you. Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all the work that you do and for being here. I am new to government. I think I'm a grand total of 2.5 years in of being a politician. So listening today, some really interesting themes have come out. Red tape versus proper oversight and that balance. And, state dollars versus federal dollars. And, the higher up you go, the harder it gets. Ms. Carlton, you mentioned the Community Development Block Grant Program. That's been a bane of existence for a city like Memphis for years. We've been underfunded because of a change in a formula that's over 50 years old, and certainly needs to be changed because the pie won't grow unless the formula, if the formula's going to change, the pie has to grow. But one of the things that's most interesting to me, and we talk about this in Memphis, and I'm sure people got their jokes about Memphis, but is bringing our government into the 21st century. And so I'm excited to hear about the grant management system because enterprise systems are heavy lifts on the implementation. There's a lot to work through and work out. But it sounds like you're trying to go for one interface that is B2C, but make it applicable on the B2B side. You mentioned the park system goes to the B2B through the federal government, but I, as a user-friendly person or somebody that may not have a grants writer, needs a friendly B2C interface for that possibility. So I am curious, and I believe the mayor from Cleveland mentioned it, is why is this program becoming voluntary as far as its implementation as, well, we think this group's interested and this group might be interested, versus mandatory? And honestly, who is the grants czar? Why is there not a grants czar when we're talking about billions of dollars that are desperately needed in communities around the state, specifically even when you do have, like the city of Memphis, an entire grants writing team almost in every division versus the counties that may not?
I can only speak to part of that. As far as not mandatory right now we're trying to get this thing up and getting it correct, and we're trying to get those that are voluntarily wanting to join into it, so we can try to, because everybody has a different process, and as you saw a while ago on my slides, when we did the requirements that labor had, but when we added finance administration, they had more requirements. And I'm sure as we work through these other agencies, we'll have more things. So as we add more stuff to it, more bells and whistles, and make it a better process, that more agencies will want to join it voluntarily. But I know I've heard the state's CIO, Brandon Gibson, wanting to make it not so voluntary. But we're not there yet, and there are some processes that might be too complicated for this system, like the DOT process. That might be more than this system could handle.
And that may be what I would say is what made Amazon Web Services and Oracle what they are, is breadth, right? Data collection and breadth and working out. But I understand that you're launching it. What I would really strongly have you consider, though, again, is coordinating and understanding. And I do understand that, especially when federal dollars come in, reporting to DOT or the Department of Interior or to HUD, every group in the federal government has their own fiefdom, but specifically to the state requirements that are unrelated to And I know formulas were mentioned, which I think they can work sometimes when you're in a position like Memphis and, the state wants to be an extension to the county, but the city's 2/3 of the county. It can get a little wonky and it requires coordination. Hopefully people elect good leaders so that coordination happens. But when you're going through these requirements, again, back to somebody that is looking at this holistically, there has to be good, better, best as far as the requirements and what each one of these individual agencies could live with versus, what they would like to have as far as oversight. Engineers, I love them to death, can over-engineer things. And when you're just a mayor or an alderman and you're trying to build a sidewalk, you're really not concerned about, an immense amount of paperwork. So those are the things that I hope you're considering as you're going through this process. The other thing, and I'm really excited you're here, is especially, a lot of these infrastructure programs, I know we're heavily focused on that. The city of Memphis is hugely focused on Memphis Area Transit Authority, but our issues, in addition to infrastructure, are people. As these billions of dollars are rolling out into the environment, and I know everybody's talking about unemployment numbers, but the labor markets are in upheaval still. I was really excited earlier to see that we just opened 2 hotels in Memphis and we're about to open a 3rd. And so I'm really excited to see what happens with the liquor tax permitting process in the state of Tennessee, because it does have an actual impact. But workforce development has got to start to be a priority if these projects are going to get funded and actually built, because I can tell you the city of Memphis puts $40 million a year almost into asphalt and paving, and we can't find people to do it. And so we can have all the money in the world to list to these projects, and no business person under the sun wants cash sitting in an account. We want that money going to work. And so I hope that there's thought given to the administrative side and how these projects are actually physically going to get done. And I'm really looking at my partners at the state legislature to think about that workforce development piece, because I can redo Matta's facility and I can redo the roads, but if I don't have a diesel mechanic to keep that bus running or a CDL driver to drive it, then it's for naught. So again, I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to ongoing dialogue. I'm really excited to hear about the CDBG and the broadband, because I know a lot of focus has been on the rural areas, but we're certainly, when you look at Memphis with the 67% of its population and poverty and the digital divide, it's a real problem for us. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time, and thank you for all that you do.
One of the things that we will be able to do with the huge amount of broadband that we're getting is to do workforce development. So training people how to use broadband, but also training people how to install broadband and to splice fiber and to be a line tech so you can get out there and hang the fiber on the poles. So we are excited to be able to incorporate that. When in the past we've just been able to pay for infrastructure, we can add that workforce development component.
Just real quick, and Brooksy touched on this a little bit. One of the things around the workforce development piece, what has me somewhat concerned is the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, or IJA as we call it, which will flow through Department of Transportation, does have provisions for workforce development. However, as Mayor Anderson spoke about this, more and more restrictive dollars will flow, which also really limits the ability to take advantage of Smart Simple, to have those comprehensive grants management systems, because in some instances we'll all be in the same house, but you'll never get to visit. Because the requirements themselves will keep us in very disparate conditions. And so the part about voluntary, I think one of the things that is paramount for us that live, eat, breathe workforce development every single day is the state itself is not exempt from that workforce development issue. We're seeing a lot of staff that are willing to come to work for the state, but that train-up period is very intense and is very real. And so for grants management, for example, not only are we seeing more restrictions on the federal dollars, those grants, the requirements are stiffening. So even if you have someone that worked in similar programs before, it's not translating anymore because it's requiring more expertise to be able to do that. And so just wanted to make sure that I leverage that point, because I think we're all kind of feeling the brunt of this at the state and the local level. And so the challenge for us will be to continue to communicate as these dollars flow that it's not the volume that's going to fix this. There are the things inside of it, such as pass-through entity. Mayor Frank, you talked about that. We're limited even in what we can hold at the state level. It's that restrictive. And so we really got to talk about how collectively, I think, as as a nation, not to get on a soapbox, but we have to talk about when we receive these dollars, there has to be some pushback to say, you can't just give us the money and give us conditions that it's impossible for us to meet. We have to have some massaging of terms and conditions before we can move forward. So I'm hopeful and really excited as my first meeting here to hear that we're grappling with these issues, because I think ultimately it will give us sort of a bigger platform to stand on and maybe push back a little bit federally on some of these restrictions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those were my comments.
You. I just had a couple of, I'll defer to the mayor, Mayor Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments and then a question. One of them on broadband. Mayor Anderson's exactly right. If you don't have a electric company that's providing broadband in your county and you're trying to deal with it without that, I've got 6 or 7 entities, all of them wanting to do certain parts of broadband, and I'll do this part, but I can't do that because I can't afford to, and it's a nightmare right now as far as broadband's concerned, and we're trying to wade our way through that, and that is going to be a complicated issue. If you don't have one entity that you can just say, yes, we're going to try to give you the money and let you do it, if you've got 6 or 7 vying for this money, it's going to be going to take some time to wade through that. The other thing is, did I understand that on the Nepa process, that the approval for that has to come from TDEC, right? Or are you approving that in-house?
TDOT has in-house approvals, and then there are certain NEPA documents that also require federal highways approval.
Right.
So there are certain levels that TDOT can approve, and we've gotten an agreement with Federal Highway where we can sign off on them. And then there are others that have to go to Federal Highway, and they actually have to sign it as well.
And a lot of what we're talking about here today, I recognize is federal regulations that you all are having to implement, and that makes the system clogged up because you've got someone sitting in Washington in a little office somewhere making these regulations that probably has very little experience about implementation anywhere in the country. And that's that's a problem for all of us. But we have a issue in Sevier County with a grant that we received in late 2018, early 2019 on a memorial for our fire victims, and the grant is for a memorial, and it's all on city property, no acquiring any property. It's in a city park that's already been approved, but this process has been back and forth, right away, NEPA, all of that. I think finally we're going to get to bid the project maybe in late this year or early 2023. But like you said, you've got to have the right-of-way approval, even though there's no right-of-way. And that took months to get that because it's all on city property. And then the NEPA process, our engineer would send something and they'd send it back and say, you need to change this. They'd change that, send it back. They'd send it back. So you need to change this. So the process has been very frustrating, I think, for us. And hopefully what we're doing here today, maybe something can come out of it to help all of us streamline that process. I think that's what we're looking for. I don't think anybody on this commission is saying that is pointing the finger at you all. You all are doing the best you can considering the circumstances you're in. And I recognize that. But we need to figure out ways that the commission, the legislature, that we can all help you all do your job and do it in a quicker manner. And it's going to take a lot of effort to do that because we need to be working to help you all and even from the federal level because a lot of this stuff is just coming down and you're having to do. So again, I would concur with what a lot of folks have said. We appreciate what you do, but we understand. I think everybody here understands the issues that we face. And a lot of those issues are not of your all's making. It's somebody somewhere else or giving regulations that you all have to enforce, And then with a limited staff, it's back and forth, back and forth. So hopefully something will come out of this that will help you all speed the process up for everybody in the state. Thank you.
I appreciate all the comments that we've had today. I just wanted to close out with just a small comment that I made. I appreciated this, but, and first of all, let me say that I agree with the other members who have spoken today. We appreciate each of you. We appreciate your departments. From my own experience, I've worked with many of you in the panel today, and always found you professional, cooperative, and we have benefited from your help. So we're very grateful for that. You do a good job, and we labor, as Mayor Waters says, we labor under rules that somebody else has made, which but I wanted to just call this attention to you because I think this, although it's a TDOT chart, I think it is an example for other departments as well, too. I did a quick count there. Each one of these little boxes, I presume, represents a step along the way. There are over 150 on this chart. And it has been my experience in the past that many times each little box has its own deadline. And if a file lays too long on one of these desks, the deadline has passed to the next box, and it'll lay over a year. And so what I'm asking you to do, if you could, is, and some of that may, and this example I just gave you was federal, not state, to be fair about it, but it was one of these boxes, a federal rule, where one desk was slow getting into the next one, and it had to wait for a year because it missed the deadline. But if there's any of these that are state-controlled, I would encourage you, or any of the departments, to find ways to simplify this. Find ways to simplify this chart. We really appreciate what you do. You've given great answers to our expressions of concern and our questions. We really appreciate what you do. And no one is pointing the finger at you. We're just all having a good discussion about some frustrations that have been expressed to us through our local governments. I believe this is the last item on the calendar for today. Director, if there's no other comment, then we will adjourn to tomorrow, 8:30. To tomorrow morning. Who picks these times? At 8:30 in the morning? All right. Well, I know. 8:30. And you can leave your book here on the table if you like. We're happy to do that. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel. We'll stand and adjourn till in the morning.